Ulysses S. Grant was born on April 27, 1822 in the small village of Point Pleasant, Ohio. Raised in a time when the nation was still finding its identity, Grant's early life unfolded in quiet simplicity, far from the grandeur and fame he would later achieve. From his humble beginnings to his rise as a prominent military leader during the Civil War, and then to the presidency, Grant's life is a journey marked by persistence, duty, and resilience. Throughout his years, whether as young soldier, a general at the forefront of history's great battles, or as the 18th President of the United States, Grant's story is one of determination, a quiet, unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even in the face of adversity. His leadership during the war, his efforts during the Reconstruction era, and his post-presidential challenges form a narrative that spans decades, shaped by a country in transition. As you settle in, allow the steady rhythm of Grant's life to carry you through the events of a tumultuous yet transformative time in American history. If you find comfort in this journey, consider liking the video, subscribing, and sharing where you're listening from. But for now, simply relax and let this calm unfolding of Ulysses S. Grant's life guide you into a peaceful rest. Ulysses Simpson Grant was born on April 27, 1822 in Point Pleasant, Ohio, to Jesse and Pauline Grant. His family lived in a small, quiet village on the banks of the Ohio River, a region shaped by both the lush green of the land and the steady flow of the river. Grant's father was a tanner by trade, a profession that kept the family's finances modest but stable. His mother, Pauline, was a kind and supportive figure who instilled in her son the values of hard work, discipline, and integrity. Grant's early years were marked by simplicity and a lack of pretension. He was the first of 6 children, and although his family was not wealthy, they were respected in the community for their honesty and fortitude. Grant's father had a strong influence on him, particularly when it came to the values of hard work and perseverance. However, the young boy was not interested in his father's trade. Instead, he took more of a liking to the outdoors and horses. He would later recall that he had a natural affinity for horses, and his love of animals would stay with him throughout his life. Education in his early years was unremarkable. Grant was not particularly fond of school, and like many young boys, he found it difficult to focus on his studies. He struggled with subjects such as Latin, which was part of the rigorous curriculum of the time. Despite this, he was a diligent student when it came to mathematics and geometry. These subjects would become the foundation for his future career in the military, where strategic thinking and precision were paramount. Grant's early schooling took place in a small log cabin schoolhouse, where the children of the community gathered to learn the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Though he did not excel in academics, he had a quiet determination that helped him persevere through the lessons. Grant's temperament as a boy was mild-mannered and reserved. He was not known for being outspoken or particularly rebellious. Instead, he was a quiet observer, often preferring to spend time alone or with animals rather than engaging in the bustling social life of other children. During this time, young Ulysses had a few close friends, but he was by no means the most outgoing child in his community. He was thoughtful and introspective, with a mind that was always active, even if his enthusiasm for formal schooling was lacking. His ability to think deeply about the world around him, however, would serve him well in his later years as he faced the numerous challenges and decisions that would come his way. It was during these early years that Grant first displayed a sense of self-reliance. Although he struggled academically, he found solace in his physical abilities, particularly when it came to working with horses. His early life was simple and unassuming, yet it laid the groundwork for the man he would become. A man who was determined, resilient, and never one to shy away from the hard work required to achieve his goals. When Grant was a young boy, his family moved to Georgetown, Ohio, where his father's tanning business flourished. The move brought a change in environment, but it did not significantly alter the course of Grant's life. His time in Georgetown was marked by his continued struggle with school and his growing love of animals. In fact, his father, who hoped his son would follow in his footsteps, was often frustrated by Ulysses's lack of interest in the tanning trade. Instead, Ulysses focused more on developing his relationship with animals and horses, a passion that would later prove essential in his military career, where knowledge of animals, especially horses, would give him an advantage. One of the most important events of Grant's early life occurred when he was 16 years old. In 1839, Ulysses Grant entered the United States Military Academy at West Point, a decision that would forever change the course of his life. His father, seeing that his son lacked a clear direction in life, suggested he apply to the academy. The idea was to secure his son's future in a stable and respected career, even if the boy was uncertain about what he wanted. West Point was a turning point for Grant, though his time there was not marked by any immediate recognition or brilliance. In fact, Grant struggled with many of the academic subjects at the academy, particularly languages. However, what set Grant apart from others was his tenacity and determination. He was not deterred by his struggles, and over time he began to excel in the military subjects, particularly engineering and mathematics. These subjects would later prove essential in his military career, where attention to detail and strategic thinking would play a pivotal role in his success. Grant's life at West Point was one of quiet perseverance. He was not a charismatic figure, nor was he a standout student, but he was methodical, diligent, and focused. Despite his academic challenges, he graduated 21st in a class of 39, a respectable achievement considering his struggles. His quiet nature, combined with his ability to observe and learn, helped him rise through the ranks of the army, although his early life had been marked by personal uncertainty and modest beginnings. As Grant left his family behind and began his studies at West Point, he embarked on a new chapter in his life. His time at the academy would shape him in ways he could not yet understand. The values instilled in him during his early years, self-reliance, discipline, and a quiet determination, would become the foundation of his leadership style. Even at a young age, Ulysses S. Grant showed the qualities of a man who would one day lead the Union to victory in the Civil War. His quiet, unassuming nature would be his strength as he quietly navigated the world of military strategy and leadership. Ulysses S. Grant's journey into the military began in 1839, when he was accepted into the United States Military Academy at West Point. Though he was only 17 years old at the time, the decision to attend West Point would shape the rest of his life, even though at the time Grant was uncertain of the path it would set for him. His father, Jesse Grant, encouraged his son to pursue a career in the military, believing it would offer stability and structure for a young man who had not yet found his calling. Upon arrival at West Point, Grant faced a new and rigorous environment, one that was far removed from the rural life he had known in Ohio. The academy, nestled on the banks of the Hudson River in New York, was a place of discipline, structure, and high expectations. Grant, like many young cadets, faced challenges in adjusting to the demanding regimen, which included early morning drills, long hours of study, and a strict code of conduct. His time at West Point would test him in ways that would become formative for his later successes. At first, Grant struggled with certain academic subjects. Unlike some of his classmates who excelled in subjects like languages, Grant found little joy in studying Latin and French, which was central to the curriculum. His difficulties in these subjects, coupled with his preference for physical activities like horsemanship, made him feel out of place at times. However, Grant was not one to be easily discouraged. Instead of giving in to frustration, he focused on what he could excel at: mathematics, engineering, and military strategy. These subjects would form the foundation of his later success as a military leader, as they emphasized precision, logic, and practical problem-solving, qualities that would serve him well in battle. Grant's ability to apply himself with patience and determination in subjects he found more challenging is a testament to his character. Over the years, he found his footing at West Point. While he may not have been the most outstanding student in terms of grades or social presence, he earned respect for his quiet, focused demeanor and his dedication to the work at hand. He spent much of his free time honing his skills with horses, something he had always loved. His aptitude for horsemanship was quickly noticed, and it became one of his greatest strengths during his military career. In the summer of 1841, Grant participated in a series of military maneuvers that gave him practical, hands-on experience. These exercises, designed to train cadets in the art of warfare, proved to be valuable in shaping Grant's understanding of leadership and military strategy. It was during these maneuvers that he began to develop a reputation for his calm, measured approach to difficult situations, which would be one of his hallmarks as a leader during the Civil War. Grant's life at West Point, while filled with challenges, also provided him with the opportunity to form lasting friendships. One of his close friends during this time was James Longstreet, who would later become a Confederate general. This relationship was one of many that would define Grant's military career, as the bonds he formed during his time at the academy would follow him throughout his life, both on the battlefield and in the political sphere. Grant's ability to persevere through adversity at West Point, despite the academic struggles he faced, was an early sign of the qualities that would make him successful as a military leader. His life at the academy was not marked by loud displays of brilliance or charismatic leadership. Instead, he quietly honed his skills, relying on his own inner resolve to guide him. These years at West Point were a time of growth and self-discovery, as Grant learned the importance of discipline, patience, and focus, values that would guide him through the darkest days of the Civil War. By the time Grant graduated in 1843, he had matured into a competent, if not extraordinary, cadet. His final class ranking was 21st out of 39, a respectable achievement given the academic challenges he faced. While he was not at the top of his class in terms of grades, his professors noted his strong sense of duty, his keen understanding of military tactics, and his steady, reliable nature. These traits, more than any academic distinction, would serve him well in the years to come. West Point's rigorous environment also introduced Grant to the wider world of military service. As a young officer, he was assigned to a series of posts across the United States. These early years of service exposed him to the realities of military life and the responsibilities of being an officer. Though he did not immediately distinguish himself in battle or in commanding troops, these experiences laid the groundwork for his later successes. The skills he developed during his time at West Point and in the early years of his military service would soon come to fruition in ways that would change the course of history. Despite his early struggles with academic subjects, Grant's years at West Point shaped him into a young officer who was ready to face the challenges of military life. The academy instilled in him a sense of discipline, duty, and resilience, qualities that would become the foundation of his leadership style. Even in the face of adversity, Grant remained steady, focused, and determined, never one to back down from a challenge. As he graduated and left West Point in 1843, Grant's future as a military officer seemed secure. Little did he know that the path ahead would take him through the fires of war and leadership, ultimately leading him to the forefront of American history. But for now, as a young second lieutenant, Grant was ready to embrace the quiet discipline of military service, a discipline that would shape the course of his life and the nation's future. In 1843, Ulysses S. Grant graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, officially becoming a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. Though his academic record was not exceptional, his determination and steady focus during his time at the academy had earned him a position within the military. His final ranking of 21st out of 39 cadets was respectable, given the challenges he had faced during his studies particularly with subjects such as languages, but it was his ability to work through adversity and remain focused that set him apart from his peers. After graduation, Grant was assigned to the 4th Infantry Regiment and stationed in St. Louis, Missouri. The assignment marked the beginning of his professional military career, though it was not the immediate path to distinction that Grant might have hoped for. His early years as young officer were marked by relatively uneventful postings, where he was often stationed at remote outposts and garrisons. Though he was a competent officer, Grant's early service did not immediately bring him recognition or opportunity for advancement. This quiet, somewhat stagnant period in Grant's life would later prove to be essential, however, as it allowed him time to reflect, learn, and develop the leadership skills that would eventually carry him to prominence. The early years of Grant's military service were spent in various locations across the United States, including the frontier regions of the American West. These postings exposed him to the realities of military life in a time of relative peace. He spent long hours patrolling the vast open landscapes with little to do other than his routine duties. Grant was often stationed in areas far from the action of the nation's wars, which meant that his responsibilities were primarily focused on maintaining order and ensuring the smooth operation of garrisons. At these posts, Grant found time to indulge in his personal interests, particularly horsemanship. His love for horses was a constant throughout his life, and it was during these early years of service that he began to develop a deep understanding of cavalry tactics. Grant's affinity for horses would later prove valuable, as it would give him an edge in both combat and command, particularly during the Civil War. It was also during this time that Grant met his future wife, Julia Dent. Their relationship would grow over the years, and she would become a steady source of support throughout Grant's military and political career. Despite the quiet nature of his assignments, Grant's time in the military exposed him to the realities of leadership and military discipline. He began to develop the steady, unflappable demeanor that would later define his leadership style. Though he was not yet in the heat of battle, these early years provided Grant with valuable insights into the responsibilities of command, and he began to develop the qualities that would later make him an effective leader. It was also during this period that Grant began to grapple with some of the internal struggles that would shape his life. He found himself questioning the direction of his career and the meaning of his military service. He had joined the army with the expectation of a career filled with adventure and prestige, but instead, he found himself stationed in isolated locations, performing routine tasks without much excitement or recognition. This sense of stagnation would linger with Grant, and for a time, he questioned his place in the military. However, Grant's resolve began to solidify as he accepted that his time in the military would be defined by persistence rather than immediate recognition. He did not allow himself to become discouraged by the quiet nature of his assignments, but instead he focused on his duties, knowing that one day an opportunity for leadership would arise. Grant's ability to endure and remain steadfast in the face of routine and inactivity became one of his defining characteristics as a leader. It was this steady determination that would later serve him well in the trials of war, where calm resolve and the ability to weather long periods of hardship would be crucial to his success. In 1845, after 2 years of service, Grant received orders to report to the Mexican-American War, which would become the defining military conflict of his early career. The war between the United States and Mexico, which had begun in 1846, would offer Grant the opportunity to prove himself in battle. Though he had not yet seen active combat, Grant's military training and quiet leadership would soon come to the forefront. In preparation for the war, Grant was assigned to the Army's Quartermaster Department, where he was responsible for ensuring that supplies and provisions were delivered to troops in the field. His attention to detail and ability to manage logistical challenges made him an effective officer, even as he struggled with some of the administrative aspects of his work. Grant's role in the Quartermaster Department allowed him to gain first-hand experience in military strategy and leadership, even as he was not directly engaged in combat. Grant's early military assignments and his role in the Mexican-American War laid the foundation for the leadership qualities that would define his career. Although his early years in the military were marked by relative obscurity, his experiences shaped him into a determined, steady, and resourceful officer. The lessons he learned during these formative years would later help him navigate the complexities of command during the Civil War, where the ability to remain calm under pressure would be crucial to his success. During his service in the Mexican-American War, Grant found himself alongside a number of future military leaders, both Union and Confederate. His interactions with these men would later influence the dynamics of the Civil War, as many of the commanders he would face on the battlefield had once been his comrades in the Mexican conflict. This period also solidified his resolve to continue in the military, despite the quiet, sometimes frustrating nature of his early career. The Mexican-American War, which officially ended in 1848, gave Grant the chance to observe the art of warfare firsthand. He learned invaluable lessons about leadership, strategy, and military logistics, which would serve him well in the coming decades. This chapter in his life marked the beginning of his transformation from a young officer uncertain of his future into a seasoned soldier who would one day lead the Union Army to victory. The outbreak of the Mexican-American War in 1846 would prove to be a defining moment in Ulysses S. Grant's military career. Although Grant had served in the U.S. Army for a few years, his experience had been limited to peaceful garrisons and remote outposts. The war with Mexico, however, would offer him his first real opportunity for combat and leadership. The war, which stemmed from territorial disputes following the annexation of Texas, was seen by many as an opportunity for the United States to expand its territory, particularly in the Southwest. Grant was assigned to the Quartermaster Department of General Zachary Taylor's army and was stationed in Mexico. His role was to manage supplies and logistics, ensuring that the troops had the necessary provisions for the campaign. This assignment, while not glamorous, offered Grant a first-hand look at the demands of military leadership in wartime. It also gave him a chance to observe and learn from the seasoned officers and commanders with whom he would work. Though Grant's role was primarily logistical, he was present at many of the significant battles of the war, including the Battle of Palo Alto and the Battle of Resaca de la Palma. These battles were part of the larger campaign to secure American interests in the region, and they provided Grant with his first exposure to the brutal realities of combat. He witnessed firsthand the challenges that came with organizing and maintaining an army in the field, as well as the importance of discipline and strategy. Grant's participation in the war was marked by a growing sense of responsibility and commitment to the mission. He was not content to simply perform his assigned duties, but sought to understand the broader strategic picture. His quiet observation and dedication to his work did not go unnoticed by his superiors. In fact, Grant's performance during the war earned him the respect of his fellow officers, including General Taylor himself, who would later recommend him for a promotion. Though he was not directly involved in combat as a combatant, Grant's role in the Mexican-American War gave him a deep appreciation for the complexities of military leadership. It also allowed him to forge relationships with other officers who would play important roles in his later career, both during the Civil War and beyond. His time in Mexico gave him a profound understanding of the importance of logistics, planning, and maintaining discipline under pressure. During the war, Grant was promoted to the rank of first lieutenant, which was a testament to his ability to perform well in his role. This promotion was a significant milestone in his early career, as it marked the beginning of his rise through the military ranks. His dedication to his duties, his focus on the well-being of the troops, and his growing understanding of military strategy set him apart from many of his peers. Grant's performance during the war was not only recognized by his superiors, but also by those who served alongside him. Despite his initial struggles with his military career, Grant emerged from the Mexican-American War with a sense of purpose and a growing sense of confidence in his abilities. The war, though difficult and often grueling, had shown him the realities of command and leadership. His experiences on the battlefield, combined with his role in managing logistics, had helped him develop the skills and knowledge that would serve him well in the years to come. It was during the Mexican-American War that Grant began to understand the importance of perseverance. Even in the face of adversity, the challenges of maintaining an army in the field, coordinating the movement of supplies, and dealing with the hardships of war were all lessons that Grant would carry with him throughout his career. His experiences in Mexico shaped his leadership style, teaching him the importance of staying calm under pressure, making difficult decisions, and focusing on the bigger picture. The war also marked the first time that Grant had direct exposure to the complexities of warfare. He witnessed the toll that combat took on soldiers and the importance of keeping morale high, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. These lessons would later serve him well during the Civil War, when he would face many of the same challenges. Grant's ability to remain composed in the face of hardship, his attention to detail, and his focus on the long-term strategy would make him a formidable leader. After the conclusion of the Mexican-American War in 1848, Grant returned to the United States, where he resumed his military duties. He was stationed at various posts, but his experiences in Mexico had left a lasting impact on him. He had gained a new sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a leader in times of crisis. Though the war had ended, the lessons he had learned would continue to influence his approach to military service. As Grant looked back on his experiences in the Mexican-American War, he realized that the war had been a formative period in his life. It had provided him with a sense of direction and a newfound respect for the responsibilities of military leadership. Though he had faced many challenges and obstacles during the war, he emerged from it with a stronger sense of self-confidence and a clearer understanding of his role in the military. His experiences in Mexico had shaped him into a more capable and determined officer, and they had laid the foundation for the leadership qualities that would later define his career. In the years that followed the war, Grant would continue to rise through the military ranks, eventually becoming one of the most celebrated commanders in American history. The lessons he learned during the Mexican-American War, combined with his steady and methodical approach to leadership, would propel him to success in the years to come. But for now, as the war came to a close, Grant returned to his duties, ready to continue his service to his country and prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. After the Mexican-American War ended in 1848, Ulysses S., Grant returned to a quieter phase of his military career. Although the war had offered him his first taste of combat and leadership, the years following the conflict were marked by a sense of stagnation and personal struggle. The excitement of battle had faded, and Grant found himself stationed at various remote posts across the United States, with little opportunity for advancement or recognition. Grant was assigned to a series of posts in the years following the war, with assignments in various locations, including the Pacific Northwest and California. These years were filled with routine duties, far removed from the chaos and intensity of battle. Grant's time in the military was now characterized by long periods of isolation, where he spent much of his time managing small garrisons and conducting routine patrols. While he carried out his duties with the same sense of discipline and professionalism that had defined his earlier service, there was little to inspire him in these quiet posts. In addition to the monotony of his military life, Grant faced personal struggles during this period. His time at these remote outposts left him feeling isolated, and he struggled with loneliness and a sense of disillusionment. Grant had entered the military with the hope of a career filled with adventure and purpose, but instead, he found himself stuck in a cycle of routine assignments with little chance for advancement. His deep longing for a more meaningful role in life led him to question his decision to remain in the army. During this time, Grant also faced challenges in his personal life. He had married Julia Dent in 1848, shortly after returning from Mexico, but their life together in these remote locations was difficult. Julia, who had grown up in a more affluent family, found the harsh conditions of frontier life difficult to endure. The couple faced the challenges of limited resources, isolation, and the uncertainty that came with life on the frontier. Still, Julia remained a steadfast support for her husband, even as Grant grappled with doubts about his future. Grant's personal and professional struggles were compounded by financial difficulties. He faced ongoing challenges with managing his finances, and his pay as a young officer was meagre. Despite his military career, Grant found himself in a difficult financial situation, and his family's struggles to make ends meet only added to his sense of frustration. These hardships weighed heavily on Grant, who had hoped that his military service would provide him with more security and stability. The financial pressures, coupled with the lack of excitement in his military assignments, led Grant to consider leaving the army altogether. His confidence in his ability to succeed in the military was shaken, and he began to question whether he was on the right path. These years marked a period of self-reflection and internal conflict for Grant, as he struggled to find meaning and direction in his life. In 1854, after nearly a decade of service, Grant made the difficult decision to resign from the US Army. This marked a turning point in his life, as he left behind the stability of military service in search of a new direction. Grant's decision to leave the army was not one he made lightly, as he had invested so much of his life in the military. However, his frustrations with the routine of garrison life, his personal struggles, and his financial difficulties led him to believe that he needed to pursue a new path. Grant's resignation from the army was followed by a period of uncertainty and hardship. He returned to civilian life, hoping to find success in the business world. He attempted various ventures, including farming and a store in the small town of Galena, Illinois, but each effort was met with failure. His financial difficulties persisted, and Grant found himself struggling to support his family. These years were marked by a deep sense of frustration and a growing awareness that his life had not turned out as he had hoped. Despite the failures in his business ventures, Grant continued to hold on to the idea that he might yet find success outside of the military. He worked tirelessly to support his family, but the weight of his financial burdens and personal struggles weighed heavily on him. It was during this time of hardship that Grant's character began to show signs of the resilience that would define him in later years. Though he faced adversity, he never gave up on the hope of finding a more fulfilling life. Though the years following Grant's resignation from the army were marked by difficulty, they were also crucial in shaping his character and fortitude. These years of struggle and frustration were an important part of his personal development, and they laid the groundwork for the qualities that would later make him one of the most successful military leaders in American history. It was in these years of quiet struggle that Grant learned to endure hardship and develop the resilience that would define his leadership style during the Civil War. Grant's time away from the military also gave him a chance to reflect on his past and reevaluate his future. He began to consider what he truly wanted from his life, and he realized that his sense of duty and his love for the military was still strong. Despite the hardships, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and an inner resolve to continue serving his country. Grant's decision to leave the army may have seemed like a moment of defeat, but it ultimately proved to be a moment of self-discovery and growth. In 1857, Grant's fortunes began to turn when he was appointed to the position of village engineer in Galena. Although this position did not offer much financial gain, it provided him with a steady job and a renewed sense of purpose. It was during this time that Grant began to consider rejoining the army. His previous struggles had given him a new perspective on life, and he realized that the military might offer him the opportunity for the kind of leadership and service he had always sought. In the end, Grant's years of personal and professional struggles were instrumental in shaping his character. They taught him the importance of perseverance and the value of resilience, qualities that would serve him well when he faced even greater challenges in the years to come. In 1861, as the United States was plunged into the chaos of the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant found himself once again drawn to the military. After years of struggle and frustration in civilian life, the outbreak of war reignited the sense of duty that had always been a part of him. With the Union's need for experienced officers, Grant saw an opportunity to return to the army and to serve his country in its time of crisis. At the time, Grant was living in Galena, Illinois, where he had settled with his family after his resignation from the army. His decision to rejoin the military came after a series of personal and professional setbacks. He had worked as a store clerk and engineer, but his financial struggles had persisted. The country's descent into war provided him with a renewed sense of purpose. He believed that this was his chance to contribute in a way that could offer the fulfillment he had long sought. Grant's re-entry into the army came in 1861, when he was appointed as a colonel of the 21st Illinois Volunteer Infantry. His experience from his earlier military service, including the leadership skills he developed during the Mexican-American War, gave him a unique edge. However, he was not immediately thrust into the spotlight. Initially, his role in the early days of the war was more administrative, and he was tasked with organizing and training the newly formed Illinois regiments. While Grant was not yet a commander on the front lines, his quiet determination and steady leadership quickly became apparent. He had learned from the trials of his previous military experience and his civilian struggles, and this time he was ready to embrace the challenge of leading troops into battle. His previous years of isolation and frustration had tempered his resolve, and he now felt confident in his ability to contribute meaningfully to the war effort. In 1862, Grant's fortunes changed when he was given command of a Union army in the Western theater of the war. The Union army had suffered early setbacks, and the need for capable leadership was urgent. Grant was appointed to lead the Army of the Tennessee, which was tasked with advancing along the Mississippi River. This was a significant moment for Grant, as it marked his first real opportunity to demonstrate his leadership and military strategy on a larger scale. Grant's first major test came with the Battle of Fort Donelson in February 1862. This battle would prove to be a defining moment in his military career. The Confederate forces had entrenched themselves in the fort, which was strategically important for controlling the Cumberland River. Grant's assault on the fort was marked by his resolve and willingness to take risks. After days of intense fighting, the Confederate forces finally surrendered, and Grant became a national hero. His famous words to the Confederate commander, "No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted," cemented his reputation for decisiveness and determination. The victory at Fort Donelson propelled Grant into the public eye. His success in the battle, combined with his willingness to engage in difficult situations without hesitation, made him a symbol of hope for the Union cause. The victory also demonstrated his understanding of the importance of seizing opportunities and maintaining the momentum of the war effort. Grant's ability to think strategically and act swiftly in the face of adversity made him a standout leader in the early days of the Civil War. Grant's success continued with the capture of Fort Henry, located on the Tennessee River, in February 1862. Together with Fort Donelson, these victories gave the Union control of key river routes in the West, and they set the stage for further offensives in the region. The importance of controlling the rivers was clear. It allowed the Union to advance deeper into Confederate territory while cutting off key supply lines. Grant's decisive victories helped to pave the way for future successes in the Western theater, where his leadership would become increasingly vital. However, it was the Battle of Shiloh, fought in April 1862, that would truly test Grant's leadership and fortitude. The battle, which took place in southwestern Tennessee, was one of the bloodiest of the early war. Grant's forces were initially taken by surprise when Confederate forces launched a ferocious attack on the Union camp. The battle seemed lost for the Union, as Grant's troops were pushed back and heavy casualties mounted. However, Grant remained resolute, refusing to retreat or give up. The next day, with reinforcements arriving, he launched a counterattack that pushed the Confederate forces back. Despite the heavy losses on both sides, the Union emerged victorious. The Battle of Shiloh marked a turning point for Grant. Though the Union victory was hard-won, the battle's immense casualties and its brutal nature were sobering reminders of the war's toll. Grant himself was deeply affected by the loss of life, and the experience would shape his approach to leadership moving forward. He would later come to be known for his willingness to accept the cost of war in pursuit of the greater goal of Union preservation. Despite the victory at Shiloh, Grant faced significant criticism in the aftermath of the battle. Some political leaders and fellow officers were critical of his leadership, questioning his preparedness and tactics. The public outcry was intense, with many calling for his removal. However, President Abraham Lincoln recognized Grant's value and stood by him, understanding that Grant's persistence, rather than his perfection, was what the Union Army needed. Lincoln's support was pivotal, and it allowed Grant to continue his leadership role. As the war progressed, Grant's reputation as a determined, unyielding leader grew. His successes in the Western Theater, including the victories at Forts Donelson and Henry, as well as Shiloh, helped to establish him as one of the most capable military leaders of the Union. By mid-1863, Grant had become the commanding general of the entire Union Army. His approach to warfare, one marked by persistence, relentless pressure on Confederate forces, and a focus on long-term goals, became a hallmark of his leadership style. Through his determination and focus, Grant had risen from a humble officer with little recognition to the central figure in the Union war effort. His leadership in the Western Theater proved that despite the challenges of his earlier years, Grant possessed the qualities necessary to lead the Union Army to victory. As 1863 drew to a close, Grant's position was solidified, and the tide of the war was beginning to shift in the Union's favor. In the spring of 1863, Ulysses S. Grant faced one of the most critical campaigns of the Civil War, the Siege of Vicksburg. By this time, he had already established himself as one of the Union Army's most determined and capable leaders, and his victories in the Western Theater had earned him widespread recognition. However, the campaign at Vicksburg would prove to be a defining moment in his military career, both in terms of strategy and leadership. Vicksburg, Mississippi, was a key Confederate stronghold located on the Mississippi River. Its capture was vital to the Union's goal of controlling the river, which would sever the Confederacy's supply lines and allow for greater mobility in the Western Theater. Grant's mission was clear: capture Vicksburg and take control of the river. However, the city was well fortified, and the Confederate defenders, under General John C. Pemberton, were determined to hold their position. Grant's strategy was one of persistence and innovation. Rather than launching a direct assault on the fortified city, which would result in heavy casualties, he chose to approach the problem from a different angle. He decided to move his army south of the city, cutting off supply lines and forcing the Confederate forces into a position where they could not retreat. This maneuver allowed Grant to lay siege to Vicksburg, effectively surrounding it and cutting off reinforcements or supplies from reaching the defenders. The siege of Vicksburg was marked by its slow and methodical nature. Grant's forces dug in and established a tight perimeter around the city, systematically cutting off the Confederate forces from the outside world. The siege lasted for over a month, and it took a toll on both the Union and Confederate soldiers. The Confederate defenders, besieged by Grant's army and unable to break free, faced food shortages, disease, and the constant threat of attack. Grant's forces, while well supplied, faced the harsh conditions of maintaining the siege, including the strain of continuous operations. During the siege, Grant exhibited the qualities that had made him a successful leader: patience, resilience, and an unwavering determination to achieve his goal. Despite the long duration of the siege, Grant never lost focus. He maintained pressure on the Confederate forces, sending out reconnaissance missions, cutting off any potential escape routes, and relentlessly pursuing the goal of victory. This approach, though costly in terms of resources and manpower, eventually wore down the Confederate defenders. Grant's ability to maintain morale within his own ranks, despite the hardships, was also a testament to his leadership. His soldiers admired his steady hand and were willing to endure great hardships in order to carry out his plans. Finally, on July 4th, 1863, after more than 40 days of siege, General Pemberton surrendered Vicksburg to Grant. The city's fall was a significant turning point in the Civil War, as it gave the Union full control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. Grant's victory at Vicksburg not only demonstrated his strategic brilliance, but also cemented his reputation as a leader who could deliver results in even the most difficult situations. The capture of Vicksburg was a major military and political victory for the Union. It marked the end of the Confederacy's control over the Mississippi River, which was vital to their supply lines and communication. The victory also gave the Union a crucial advantage in the Western theatre, opening the door for further offensives in the region. For Grant, it was a personal triumph as well. The success of the siege brought him national acclaim and solidified his place as one of the top generals in the Union Army. The importance of the Vicksburg campaign cannot be overstated. Not only did it secure a key strategic victory, but it also demonstrated the qualities of leadership that Grant had honed over the course of his career. His ability to remain focused under pressure, to adapt his tactics to the realities of warfare, and to inspire his troops to carry out difficult operations were all on full display during the siege. The capture of Vicksburg was, in many ways, a reflection of Grant's leadership style. Patient, relentless, and determined to achieve the objective, regardless of the cost. The victory at Vicksburg also had significant implications for the larger course of the war. With the Mississippi River under Union control, Confederate forces were now isolated in the West. The Union's ability to move troops and supplies along the river gave them a strategic advantage, while the Confederacy's loss of the river cut off critical resources. The fall of Vicksburg, coupled with the Union victory at Gettysburg just days earlier, marked a turning point in the war, with the momentum swinging in favor of the Union. In the aftermath of the victory, Grant was promoted to the rank of Major General of the United States Army, becoming the highest-ranking officer in the Union Army. His success in the West had earned him the admiration of President Abraham Lincoln, who recognized Grant's ability to lead and make decisive moves. With the promotion, Grant was now tasked with overseeing the entire Union Army's operations, including the ongoing campaigns in the Eastern Theater, where the war had reached a critical juncture. As Grant took on greater responsibility, he was faced with the challenge of coordinating the various Union armies and crafting a unified strategy to defeat the Confederacy. The success at Vicksburg had brought him to the forefront of the war effort, and now it was time for him to apply the lessons he had learned in the West to the larger conflict. The next phase of the war would demand even greater determination, as Grant faced the challenges of leading a divided and weary nation toward victory. The victory at Vicksburg in July 1863 had elevated Ulysses' Grant to national prominence, but it was only the beginning of his rise to the highest echelons of military leadership in the United States. As the Union Army prepared for its next phase of the war, Grant's focus shifted to the southern heartland. In late 1863, he was called upon to address a critical situation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where Confederate forces had gained a strong foothold, threatening Union control of vital supply routes. The Battle of Chattanooga would prove to be another pivotal moment in Grant's career, solidifying his reputation as a leader capable of orchestrating decisive victories. At the time, the Union Army in Chattanooga, commanded by General William Rosecrans, was besieged by Confederate forces led by General Braxton Bragg. The Confederates had surrounded the Union forces and cut off their supply lines, leaving them in a perilous position. The Union forces were demoralized, and morale was low. Supplies were running out, and the Union Army faced the real threat of being forced into retreat, a situation that would have severely undermined the Union's efforts in the Western Theater. Grant was called in to take control of the situation and relieve the Union forces. Upon arriving in Chattanooga, he immediately assessed the situation and recognized the strategic importance of breaking the Confederate siege. Grant's first priority was to open up the supply lines, which would allow the Union forces to be resupplied and reinvigorated. To accomplish this, he quickly devised a series of tactical maneuvers that would not only lift the siege, but also put the Confederate forces on the defensive. Grant's approach to the Battle of Chattanooga was marked by boldness and a clear understanding of the battlefield. He coordinated with his subordinate commanders, including General George H. Thomas, whose courage and leadership at the Battle of Chickamauga had earned him the nickname the Rock of Chickamauga. Together they formulated a plan that involved both direct and indirect attacks, exploiting weaknesses in the Confederate lines and flanking their positions. One of the most significant moves Grant made was to bring in reinforcements from the Army of the Potomac, led by General Joseph Hooker, which bolstered Union numbers and provided much-needed support. Grant's decision to act swiftly and decisively demonstrated his ability to coordinate large-scale operations and manage multiple fronts simultaneously. The arrival of these reinforcements was pivotal in the success of the campaign, as it allowed the Union Army to execute a series of coordinated attacks on Confederate positions. The battle began on November 23, 1863, with Grant launching a series of attacks on the Confederate lines. The Union forces targeted key Confederate positions, including Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge, which were strategically important for controlling the area. The fighting was fierce, and the terrain was challenging, with steep hills and rocky outcrops making the battlefield difficult to navigate. However, Grant's forces pressed forward with determination, exploiting the Confederates' overstretched lines. The Battle of Lookout Mountain, which took place on November 24, 1863, became one of the most iconic moments of the campaign. Despite difficult conditions, Union troops succeeded in driving the Confederate forces from the mountain. The victory was symbolic, as it opened up the path for further assaults on Confederate positions. The battle became known as the Battle Above the Clouds because of the low-hanging clouds that obscured the battlefield, creating an almost surreal and dramatic atmosphere. The climax of the Battle of Chattanooga came on November 25, 1863, with the Union assault on Missionary Ridge. The Confederate position on the ridge was formidable, and the Union Army faced fierce resistance. However, in a stunning display of boldness and audacity, Grant's forces, led by General Thomas, launched a direct assault on the ridge. The attack was initially disorganized, but as the Union forces pressed forward, they managed to break through the Confederate defenses. The Confederate forces, unable to hold their position, were forced into retreat, and the siege of Chattanooga was broken. The Union victory at Chattanooga was a major turning point in the Civil War. Not only did it relieve the besieged Union Army, but it also secured control of vital supply lines and opened the door for further Union offensives in the South. The victory boosted Union morale and demonstrated that Grant's leadership could bring decisive results in the most difficult circumstances. For Grant, the success at Chattanooga marked a key moment in his military career. The victory propelled him to the forefront of the Union war effort, and his reputation as a decisive and effective commander was solidified. President Abraham Lincoln, who'd been watching Grant's rise closely, took note of his ability to win battles despite overwhelming odds. Lincoln's faith in Grant grew, and in the wake of the victory at Chattanooga, he promoted Grant to the rank of General-in-Chief of all Union armies in March 1864. Grant's promotion to General-in-Chief marked the beginning of a new phase in his leadership. He was now tasked with overseeing the coordination of all Union forces across the country. While he continued to lead the Union Army in the West, he also focused on the larger strategy of the war, developing a plan to defeat the Confederacy on all fronts. His promotion was a recognition of his military prowess and his ability to manage complex operations. The Battle of Chattanooga was not just a military victory, it was also a personal triumph for Grant. It demonstrated his ability to rise to the occasion in times of crisis and to inspire his troops to achieve great things. The victory at Chattanooga also underscored Grant's leadership qualities, his boldness, his strategic vision, and his unwavering determination to achieve the Union's goals. It was these qualities that would carry him through the most challenging battles of the war, including his ultimate campaign against General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. With his success at Chattanooga, Grant had laid the foundation for his next great challenge, the campaign to end the Civil War once and for all. As 1864 began, the Union Army was poised to take the fight to the Confederate heartland, and Grant, now firmly in command, was ready to lead his troops toward the final victory. After his promotion to General-in-Chief of the Union Army in March 1864, Ulysses S. Grant found himself at the helm of the Union war effort, overseeing operations across multiple fronts. With the appointment, Grant took on the monumental task of coordinating the Union Army's strategy, and his ultimate goal was clear: to bring an end to the Civil War by defeating the Confederate Army once and for all. His first major operation as General-in-Chief would be the Overland Campaign, a series of grueling battles that would test his leadership, resolve, and ability to manage the largest army the world had ever seen. Grant's approach to the Overland Campaign was defined by his unrelenting drive to apply continuous pressure on the Confederate Army. Unlike his predecessors, who often hesitated to engage in battle unless they were sure of victory, Grant was willing to take risks and engage the enemy at every opportunity. His goal was to weaken the Confederate Army through attrition, exhausting its resources and morale over time. The Overland Campaign began in May 1864 with the Battle of the Wilderness, a dense, wooded area near the Rapidan River in Virginia. The terrain was unforgiving. Thick forests and underbrush made it difficult for both sides to maneuver, and the smoke from gunfire hung in the air, limiting visibility. The battle, fought between Grant's Army of the Potomac and Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, would be a brutal test for both sides. The Battle of the Wilderness was one of the first encounters between Grant and Lee in the East, and it marked the beginning of a long, bloody conflict. Grant, determined to press forward, engaged Lee's army with the full force of his troops. The battle was chaotic, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. Despite heavy losses on both sides, Grant refused to retreat. Unlike his predecessors, who might have fallen back after such a bloody engagement, Grant pressed forward. He ordered his army to continue their march south toward Richmond, the Confederate capital. The battle was a costly one, with nearly 30,000 combined casualties, but Grant's decision to continue the advance despite the heavy losses was a testament to his determination and resolve. Grant's leadership was now firmly defined by his ability to accept the high cost of war in exchange for the ultimate goal of preserving the Union. His willingness to sacrifice lives in pursuit of victory was both praised and criticized, but it became clear that Grant's focus was unyielding. He would never allow his army to stop or turn back, no matter the challenges. In the aftermath of the Wilderness, Lee's forces, though battered, were still formidable. Grant's army was also weary, but Grant had a clear plan. Rather than retreating or regrouping, he ordered his troops to keep pushing forward, attacking Lee's army at every opportunity. The goal was simple: to force Lee into a position where his army could no longer sustain itself, thereby breaking the Confederate will to continue fighting. Following the Wilderness, Grant engaged Lee at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. The fighting at Spotsylvania was intense, with both sides entrenched in defensive positions. The battle, which lasted for over 2 weeks, was marked by brutal trench warfare, where soldiers faced constant fire and the threat of being overwhelmed. Grant's army suffered significant losses, but again he refused to pull back. His strategy was clear: keep the pressure on Lee, never giving him a moment's respite to regroup or recover. The Battle of Cold Harbor, which occurred in early June 1864, was another chapter in the Overland Campaign that tested Grant's resolve. The Union Army launched a direct assault on entrenched Confederate positions, resulting in one of the most lopsided defeats of the campaign. Grant's army suffered heavy casualties, with nearly 7,000 Union soldiers killed, wounded, or captured at a matter of minutes. The cost of the battle was staggering, but again, Grant refused to retreat. He knew that each battle was a small part of a much larger effort, and that victory could not be achieved without pushing through the hardships of war. In the face of such staggering losses, Grant's reputation as a relentless commander only grew stronger. His ability to withstand criticism for the high casualties and continue his aggressive strategy was a reflection of his unwavering belief in the necessity of victory at any cost. Though many in the North began to question the tactics of such relentless fighting, Grant's strategy was beginning to show results. Lee's army, despite its formidable defensive positions, was being worn down. The pressure from the Union Army was unrelenting, and the Confederate Army's ability to replace lost men and supplies was steadily diminishing. As the Overland Campaign dragged on through the summer of 1864, Grant's strategy of attrition began to take its toll on the Confederate forces. Lee, though still a brilliant commander, was facing the growing exhaustion of his army. Meanwhile, Grant's forces, while suffering heavy losses, had the advantage of a virtually unlimited supply of men and resources from the North. The Union's ability to replace losses and continue the fight was a stark contrast to the Confederacy's dwindling manpower and resources. By the time the Overland Campaign reached its conclusion in the summer of 1864, the Union Army had suffered more than 60,000 casualties. The campaign had been a costly and bloody affair, but it had also brought Grant closer to his ultimate goal of defeating the Confederate Army. Though he had not yet achieved a final victory, his strategy had successfully placed Lee on the defensive, forcing him to react to Union moves rather than dictate the course of the battle. The Overland Campaign, though a series of brutal and costly engagements, marked the beginning of the end for the Confederate cause. Grant's persistence, his refusal to be deterred by setbacks, and his focus on achieving long-term goals rather than immediate victories would define the rest of the war. His ability to press forward despite the high cost of war was a reflection of his character, and it was this same determination that would ultimately lead to the fall of the Confederacy and the end of the Civil War. As the campaign continued, Grant's leadership would be further tested, but it was clear that he had become the Union's most capable military leader, and the man who would ultimately bring the war to a victorious conclusion. The Overland Campaign, though a significant series of battles, had not yet yielded the final victory Grant sought. After the grueling battles of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor, the Union Army faced a new challenge: the Siege of Petersburg. Located just south of Richmond, Virginia, Petersburg was a crucial supply hub for the Confederate capital. Grant's objective was clear: capture Petersburg, cut off Confederate supplies, and cripple the Confederate Army's ability to continue the war. The Siege of Petersburg began in June 1864, after the Union Army, under Grant's command, faced off with General Robert E. Lee's forces in a long, drawn-out series of confrontations. The Confederates, though weakened, held strong defensive positions in the trenches surrounding the city. Grant, known for his willingness to engage in relentless attritional warfare, was prepared for a prolonged siege. The Union's strategic advantage lay in its superior resources and manpower, which allowed Grant to sustain a long siege while Lee's forces were increasingly stretched thin. The city of Petersburg itself was fortified with a series of trenches and defensive lines, which made it a difficult target. Grant's forces began to dig in around the Confederate defenses, using siege tactics that had proven effective in previous wars. The initial phases of the siege were characterized by slow, methodical attacks, aimed at weakening the Confederate positions over time. Despite the difficulty of the terrain and the formidable defensive works, Grant was patient. He understood that victory would not come through a single decisive battle, but through prolonged pressure on the Confederate forces. As the siege continued through the summer and into the fall of 1864, Grant's strategy became more apparent. His goal was not just to capture Petersburg, but to force Lee to fight on multiple fronts, exhausting his resources and morale. To accomplish this, Grant planned a series of coordinated attacks designed to stretch Lee's forces thin and create vulnerabilities in the Confederate defenses. He also planned a series of diversionary maneuvers aimed at confusing the enemy and creating opportunities for breakthrough. In the fall of 1864, the Union Army made a critical breakthrough at the Battle of the Crater. During this battle, the Union forces detonated a massive mine underneath the Confederate lines, creating a massive crater and momentarily breaking through the Confederate defenses. While the initial success was promising, the follow-up assault faltered due to poor coordination and a lack of proper leadership. The Confederate forces quickly regrouped, and the Union Army was unable to capitalize on the advantage gained by the explosion. Despite the failure to exploit the breakthrough, the Battle of the Crater demonstrated Grant's willingness to take bold risks in pursuit of victory. Despite the setback, Grant refused to abandon the siege. He recognized that the key to victory lay not in a single breakthrough, but in the continued application of pressure. Grant's forces dug in and extended their lines, slowly tightening the noose around the Confederate army. The siege would last for nearly a year, with both sides enduring significant casualties. The prolonged fighting took a heavy toll on the Confederate army, which was running out of food, supplies, and reinforcements. Throughout the siege, Grant's leadership remained steady. His focus on long-term goals and his refusal to be discouraged by setbacks were key to the Union Army's persistence. Grant's ability to maintain his soldiers' morale and keep them focused on the ultimate goal of ending the war was crucial. His leadership during this time, marked by patience, perseverance, and strategic vision, reinforced the Union Army's commitment to achieving victory. By early 1865, the Confederate Army was beginning to crumble. Lee's forces were weakened, and Petersburg was no longer tenable as a stronghold. Grant, having exhausted Lee's resources and stretched his lines thin, made a final push to break the Confederate defenses. In April 1865, after a series of coordinated attacks and a relentless pursuit of the Confederate Army, Grant succeeded in forcing Lee to retreat from Petersburg. The fall of Petersburg marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy, as the Confederate Army was forced to abandon Richmond, and Grant's forces began their march toward the final confrontation. The capture of Petersburg and the subsequent retreat of the Confederate forces were crucial moments in the war. Grant's strategy of prolonged pressure, coupled with his ability to adapt and persist in the face of setbacks, had finally broken the Confederate defense. The Union Army's victory in Petersburg led to the eventual surrender of General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, effectively bringing the Civil War to an end. For Grant, the victory at Petersburg was the culmination of years of hard-fought battles. It marked the successful execution of his strategy and the achievement of his ultimate goal, the preservation of the Union. the victory also solidified Grant's place in history as one of the most successful military leaders in American history. His leadership during the Siege of Petersburg, as well as his unyielding commitment to achieving victory, earned him the admiration of both his peers and the nation. The Siege of Petersburg was a defining moment in the Civil War, but it was also a reflection of Grant's leadership style. He had embraced the realities of total war, understanding that victory would not come easily or without cost. His ability to press forward despite the high casualties, his strategic foresight and his determination to break the Confederate will were all critical factors in the Union's success. As the war drew to a close, Grant's leadership would be remembered not only for his military victories, but also for the role he played in healing the nation in the years that followed. His leadership in the final stages of the war laid the foundation for the post-war Reconstruction era, during which he would serve as president, continuing his commitment to preserving the Union and ensuring a lasting peace. As the spring of 1865 approached, the Confederate Army, under General Robert E. Lee, was in retreat. The losses suffered by the Confederacy in the campaigns that had unfolded during the past year had been devastating. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, once a formidable force, was now depleted and its morale was low. Grant's strategy of attrition had worked, forcing Lee into a position where he could no longer sustain the fight. The Union Army, under Grant's leadership, had finally worn down the Confederate resistance. After the fall of Petersburg and the abandonment of Richmond, the Confederate capital, it became clear that the end of the Civil War was imminent. Lee, unable to continue the fight and faced with dwindling supplies and men, began to consider the possibility of surrender. Grant, ever the persistent and strategic leader, had already prepared for this moment. His goal was to bring about a swift and honourable conclusion to the war, one that would allow the Union to reunite and heal. On April 9th, 1865, after a series of tense and difficult negotiations, General Lee met General Grant at the McLean House in Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, to formally surrender. The meeting, which would mark the end of the Civil War, was calm, respectful, and devoid of bitterness. Grant, known for his steady demeanour, offered generous terms to Lee, understanding the importance of healing the divisions that had torn the country apart. The terms of the surrender were simple yet profound. Lee's men were to lay down their arms, and the soldiers would be allowed to return home with their horses as long as they swore an oath not to take up arms again against the Union. Grant's decision to allow Lee's men to keep their horses was a reflection of his desire to restore peace and foster goodwill. The horses, many of which were essential for farming, would allow the Confederate soldiers to return to their homes and rebuild their lives. It was a gesture that would be remembered for its humanity and for Grant's commitment to reconciliation. The surrender at Appomattox was a moment of profound significance. The Confederate Army, which had fought so fiercely for 4 years, was now broken. The war that had claimed the lives of over 600,000 Americans was finally coming to an end. For Grant, the surrender was the culmination of years of strategic planning, relentless fighting, and personal sacrifice. His victory at Appomattox was not just a military achievement, it was a symbol of the Union's perseverance and of his unwavering commitment to preserving the United States. Following Lee's surrender, other Confederate armies across the South began to surrender as well. The Confederate resistance had collapsed, and within weeks, the Civil War came to an official end. The Union had been preserved, and the long years of bloodshed and division were finally over. Grant's leadership had played a central role in this victory, and his actions at Appomattox would become one of the defining moments of his life. As Grant and Lee parted ways after the surrender, the atmosphere was one of quiet dignity. Grant, in his characteristic manner, avoided any displays of triumph. He did not gloat over his victory or take satisfaction in the Confederacy's defeat. Instead, he offered his respect to Lee and his men, recognizing the bravery and determination with which they had fought for their cause. In this moment, Grant's character as a leader, steadfast, composed, and magnanimous, was fully on display. The surrender at Appomattox was not only a military victory but also a personal one for Grant. His perseverance through the many years of war, his ability to endure the hardships of battle, and his willingness to accept the high costs of conflict had all led to this moment. It was a testament to his leadership that the surrender was handled with such grace, and it reflected his understanding that the war's end was not about vengeance, but about restoring peace and rebuilding the nation. In the wake of the surrender, Grant's reputation as a military leader was secure. He was hailed as the hero who had brought an end to the war, and his leadership was celebrated across the North. But Grant's vision extended beyond military victory. He understood that the true work of reconciliation and rebuilding lay ahead. The wounds of the war, both physical and psychological, would take years to heal, and Grant would later apply the same steady resolve and determination to the challenging work of reconstruction, seeking to heal the nation and reunite the Southern states with the Union. For Grant, the end of the Civil War did not mark the end of his service to the nation. Rather, it was a new beginning, a time to turn his attention to the reconstruction of the South and the broader challenges of post-war America. Though his role as a military leader had concluded, his commitment to the Union would remain steadfast as he moved into the political realm, where he would eventually become the 18th President of the United States. The surrender at Appomattox was a pivotal moment in American history, and Grant's leadership throughout the war would continue to have lasting effect on the nation. His ability to see the war through to its conclusion, his steady hand in the face of adversity, and his commitment to peace would make him one of the most respected figures in American history. The end of the Civil War marked the beginning of a new chapter for the United States, one that would require the same determination, leadership, and vision that Grant had displayed throughout the conflict. After the end of the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant's role in American history shifted from military leader to the nation's highest office, as he was elected the 18th President of the United States in 1868. Grant, who'd led the Union Army to victory, now faced a new and equally daunting challenge. Overseeing the reconstruction of the South and guiding the country through the difficult process of healing the wounds left by 4 years of brutal conflict. Grant took office in March 1869, and his presidency marked the beginning of a crucial phase in American history. The country was still grappling with the aftermath of the war, and the southern states were struggling to rebuild their economies and integrate newly freed African Americans into society. Reconstruction was a complex and contentious process, with varying opinions on how best to restore the Union and address the social and political issues that had been exacerbated by the war. Grant, despite his military background, approached the presidency with a sense of duty and responsibility. He was committed to protecting the rights of former slaves and ensuring that the Union's victory in the war led to lasting changes in American society. As president, he supported the passage of the 15th Amendment, which granted African American men the right to vote and worked to enforce the rights of freedmen in the South. Grant's administration oversaw the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau, which provided support to African Americans and poor whites in the South, helping them gain education, land, and employment opportunities. However, Grant's presidency was also marked by challenges and frustrations. The Reconstruction process was highly divisive, with many southern states resisting federal efforts to enforce civil rights for African Americans. The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups emerged as powerful forces in the South, using violence and intimidation to prevent African Americans from voting and asserting their rights. Grant was faced with the difficult task of ensuring that the federal government upheld the rights of African Americans while also dealing with the entrenched resistance in the South. Grant's response to the rise of the white supremacist violence was swift and decisive. In 1871, he passed the Enforcement Acts, which empowered the federal government to intervene in the South, and crack down on groups like the Ku Klux Klan. These laws allowed Grant to send federal troops to southern states to protect African Americans and suppress the violence. While these measures were successful in some areas, the violence in the South continued, and the national will to enforce Reconstruction waned as Grant's presidency progressed. In addition to the challenges in the South, Grant's administration was also plagued by political scandals and corruption. Although Grant was known for his personal integrity, his administration was marred by several instances of corruption within his cabinet and among his associates. The most notable of these was the Credit Mobilier scandal, in which members of Congress were found to have accepted bribes from a railroad construction company. Another scandal involved the Whiskey Ring, a network of distillers and government officials who conspired to defraud the federal government of taxes. While Grant himself was never directly implicated in these scandals, they tarnished his reputation and hindered his ability to govern effectively. Despite these challenges, Grant remained steadfast in his commitment to Reconstruction and to protecting the rights of African Americans. His second term, which began in 1873, saw a shift in national sentiment, as many Northern voters grew weary of the ongoing Reconstruction efforts and the political turmoil associated with it. As a result, the Republican Party began to lose its grip on power in the South, and Southern states began to implement laws that restricted the rights of African Americans. One of the most significant moments of Grant's second term came in 1875 when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1875. This law prohibited racial discrimination in public accommodations, such as hotels, theaters, and public transportation, although the law was a significant step forward in the fight for civil rights. It was ultimately ineffective, as the Supreme Court ruled in 1883 that the law was unconstitutional. This ruling marked a major setback for the civil rights movement, and was a reminder of the ongoing challenges faced by African Americans in the post-war period. Grant's presidency was also marked by significant foreign policy achievements. His administration worked to strengthen the United States' relationships with Latin American countries and negotiated the Treaty of Washington in 1871, which resolved a long-standing dispute with Britain over the Alabama claims. The treaty helped to improve relations with Britain and marked a significant diplomatic victory for Grant. Additionally, Grant's administration was instrumental in expanding the U.S. presence in the Pacific, particularly through the annexation of the Midway Islands in 1867. Despite his foreign policy successes and his commitment to civil rights, Grant's presidency was often criticized for its inability to address the broader challenges of Reconstruction and for its failure to fully implement the goals of the Union. Victory. The end of his second term in 1877 marked the end of Reconstruction. The Southern states regained control and implemented discriminatory laws that would last for decades. Grant left office in 1877 and retired from public life, but his legacy as president remains a subject of debate. While he is often praised for his unwavering commitment to civil rights and his leadership during the Civil War, his presidency was marred by corruption scandals and an inability to fully address the deep-seated racial and political divisions in the South. Nevertheless, Grant's efforts during Reconstruction laid the groundwork for the civil rights advancements of the 20th century, and his leadership during the war ensured the survival of the Union. As Grant's presidency came to an end, the country stood at a crossroads. The promises of Reconstruction had been left unfulfilled, and the South was entering a period of economic and political upheaval that would last for decades. Yet Grant's contributions to the preservation of the Union and his role in advancing civil rights would remain a lasting part of his legacy, even as the nation moved forward into a new era. After leaving office in 1877, Ulysses S. Grant retired from the presidency, but his post-presidential years were far from the peaceful retirement he may have imagined. Although Grant had achieved great success as a military leader and as president, The years following his departure from the White House were marked by personal and financial difficulties. He was faced with new challenges, not on the battlefield or in the political arena, but in trying to manage his own financial well-being and finding purpose outside the public eye. One of the immediate struggles Grant faced upon leaving office was his financial situation. Throughout his presidency, Grant had struggled with personal finances. He had lived a life that, though steady and honourable, did not always align with the wealth and prosperity one might expect from someone in his position. Despite his prominent role as a general and president, Grant had never been financially savvy. His finances were often managed by others, and during his time in office he faced multiple financial difficulties, some of which were exacerbated by his trust in friends and associates who, unfortunately, took advantage of him. After retiring, Grant tried to transition into private life, but his financial troubles continued. In 1880, he was introduced to a business venture that would lead to a significant setback. Grant became involved in a financial partnership with a firm that promised lucrative returns through investments in the mining industry. Unfortunately, this investment turned out to be a scam, and Grant lost nearly all his money. This was a devastating blow for him, as he found himself facing not only the loss of his savings, but also the burden of mounting debts. Grant's financial situation had grown dire, and despite his past accomplishments, he found himself in need of a way to recover from the ruinous investment. He had invested large sums into the venture, and the loss put considerable strain on his family. His wife, Julia, had always been supportive of him, but the financial collapse created tension as their once stable life was suddenly in jeopardy. In the face of these financial struggles, Grant found solace in his writing. In 1884, he began work on his memoirs, hoping that the proceeds from their publication would help him recover financially. Grant had always enjoyed writing and had kept journals throughout his life, often reflecting on his military experiences. With his back against the wall, writing became his way forward. In order to make his memoirs a reality, Grant turned to his friend and renowned author Mark Twain. Twain, who had become one of the most famous writers in America, recognized Grant's unique perspective on the Civil War and history. Twain helped Grant secure a publishing deal with the firm of Charles L. Webster and Company. The deal was crucial for Grant, as it offered him an advance and the promise of a portion of the profits from the sale of the book. Grant's memoirs would be a detailed account of his military career, offering insight into the events of the Civil War and his own experiences during that time. As Grant wrote, he poured his energy into recalling the trials, triumphs, and hardships of his military life. His memoirs would cover not only his leadership in the Civil War, but also his personal reflections on the challenges of leadership, his relationship with his fellow generals, and his thoughts on the war's significance in the context of the nation's future. He wrote with a clarity and honesty that would later be praised for its directness and simplicity. Though the work was grueling and at times emotionally taxing, Grant found strength in it. The memoirs allowed him to process the events of his past, particularly the many difficulties he'd faced, and gave him a sense of purpose as he worked to secure his family's future. His writing was driven not only by the need for financial recovery, but also by his desire to leave a legacy that would accurately reflect the historical events he had lived through. In 1885, the first volume of Grant's memoirs was published, and it quickly became a commercial success. The book was met with critical acclaim, and its honest portrayal of the Civil War and Grant's experiences as a military leader resonated with readers across the country. Grant's writing was praised for its straightforwardness and lack of pretension. It offered a rare glimpse into the mind of one of the nation's most important figures, and it allowed the public to understand Grant's perspective on the war, his leadership, and the burden of command. The success of Grant's memoirs brought him much-needed financial relief. The proceeds from the sales of the book were substantial, and they allowed Grant to pay off his debts and provide for his family. The book not only salvaged his financial situation, but also restored his reputation, reminding the public of his invaluable contributions to the Union victory in the Civil War. By the time of his death in 1885, Ulysses S. Grant had achieved financial stability once more, thanks in large part to the success of his memoirs. His final years were marked by a sense of quiet fulfillment. He had overcome the financial hardships that had plagued him after his presidency, and his memoirs would go on to be considered one of the most important historical accounts of the Civil War. Grant's legacy, which had once been at risk due to his financial mismanagement and the scandals surrounding his presidency, was ultimately secured by his writing. His memoirs not only provided a critical historical document, but also cemented his place in American history as a man who had dedicated his life to the service of his country, from his leadership in battle to his final days as a writer. Despite the challenges he faced in his post-presidential life, Ulysses S. Grant's strength, resilience, and determination saw him through to the end. His ability to overcome adversity and find purpose through writing was a testament to the character that had defined him throughout his life. He passed away on July 23, 1885, just 2 days after completing the final chapters of his memoirs. His death marked the end of a remarkable life, a life marked by triumph and failure, victory and struggle, but ultimately a life of unwavering dedication to the Union and its future. In the final years of his life, Ulysses S. Grant's legacy was solidified not only by his remarkable achievements during the Civil War and his presidency, but also by the way in which he faced his final challenges with dignity, perseverance, and a deep sense of responsibility to his family and country. After the financial setbacks caused by his failed business venture, Grant found himself at a crossroads in the early 1880s. His presidential years had been difficult, filled with political strife and corruption scandals, but his enduring commitment to his nation and the work of reconstruction was still part of his larger legacy. The publication of his memoirs, however, would prove to be a turning point that restored his reputation and, more importantly, gave him the chance to provide for his family in the final years of his life. After completing his memoirs in 1885, Grant was finally able to pay off his debts, something that had hung over him for years. The book's success provided him not only with financial security, but with a sense of accomplishment that he had not experienced since his years of military service. The memoirs were widely praised and became a critical historical document, not only offering insight into the military strategies that won the Civil War, but also revealing Grant's personal reflections on his leadership and the immense burden of command. Despite this relief, Grant's health began to decline in the spring of 1884. He had long struggled with various ailments, but in the summer of that year he was diagnosed with throat cancer, a diagnosis that would take a toll on him in the month that followed. The disease was particularly cruel for Grant, who'd spent much of his life in public service, commanding armies and delivering speeches. His ability to speak was severely impaired, but throughout his illness, he showed remarkable fortitude and determination. During this difficult period, Grant continued to receive letters of support and admiration from all over the country. Many of these letters came from people he had known throughout his life, fellow soldiers, political leaders, and ordinary citizens who expressed their gratitude for his service to the nation. As he lay in bed, struggling with his illness, these messages of appreciation must have provided some comfort. However, Grant remained focused on his family and the legacy he would leave for them, knowing that his time was short. His final months were spent with Julia, his beloved wife, whom he had married in 1848. Throughout their marriage, Julia had been his constant supporter, and it was during these final months that she remained by his side, nursing him through his illness. Their relationship had been filled with both joy and difficulty, but Julia's devotion to her husband in his final days was a testament to their deep bond. In his final days, Grant took solace in knowing that his memoirs had been completed and that they would stand as a lasting testament to his life. His contributions to the country, both as a military leader and as a president, would endure in the pages of his writing, offering a glimpse into the mind of a man who had dedicated his life to the Union's cause. His memoirs, published posthumously, would be remembered as one of the most important historical works of the 19th century. On July 23, 1885, Ulysses S. Grant passed away at the age of 63. The news of his death was met with a wave of national mourning. Flags were lowered to half-staff, and memorial services were held across the country. Grant's death marked the end of an era, one that had seen the country torn apart by civil war and then brought together through the resolve of men like Grant. His leadership during the war, his presidency, and his role in the reconstruction of the South had shaped the course of American history, and his loss was felt deeply by a nation that had come to regard him as a hero. In the days that followed his death, the country reflected on Grant's legacy. His military victories, particularly his leadership during the Civil War, had preserved the Union and helped bring an end to slavery. As president, he had worked tirelessly to enforce civil rights for African Americans and to rebuild the South after the devastation of the war. Although his presidency had been marred by political corruption, his personal integrity remained unquestioned, and his commitment to his country was never in doubt. In the years following his death, Grant's legacy continued to grow. His memoirs became a cornerstone of Civil War history, offering an unparalleled insight into the mind of one of the most important figures of the 19th century. His leadership, both during the war and after, became a model for future generations, and his commitment to the ideals of the Union and the principles of equality and justice remained a guiding light for the country. Grant's funeral, held in New York City, was attended by thousands of people, including military leaders, political figures, and ordinary citizens. His coffin was draped in the American flag, and the procession was a solemn tribute to a man who had given so much to the nation. His body was later interred in a mausoleum at Riverside Park in New York, where it rests today as a testament to his contributions to the country. In many ways, Ulysses S. Grant's life mirrored the struggles and triumphs of the nation he served. From his humble beginnings in Ohio to his rise as the leader of the Union Army, Grant's story was one of resilience, determination, and duty. His legacy as a military leader, president, and advocate for civil rights continues to resonate today. He remains an enduring symbol of the qualities that helped preserve the United States during one of its most difficult periods, and his memory lives on as a reminder of the sacrifices made for the ideals of freedom and unity. Following Ulysses S. Grant's death in 1885, his legacy continued to evolve as the country reflected on his contributions to the Union and to American history. As a military leader, president, and author, Grant's impact on the course of the nation was profound, and his role in the Civil War and in Reconstruction shaped the future of the United States. However, it was not without its complexities, and as time passed, historians and citizens began to assess both the triumphs and shortcomings of his life and career. Grant's military leadership, especially during the Civil War, is often viewed as one of the most significant aspects of his legacy. His role in the Union victory was crucial. His strategy of relentless pursuit, his ability to manage large and often disparate forces, and his determination in the face of setbacks made him an unparalleled military leader. His victories at Vicksburg, Chattanooga, and the final campaigns leading to Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox were all pivotal in ensuring the preservation of the Union and the end of slavery in America. Grant's commitment to the cause was unshakable, and his ability to lead the Union Army to victory in such a prolonged and brutal conflict secured his place as one of the greatest generals in American history. Yet despite his success in the military, Grant's presidency has been viewed with mixed opinions over time. While he's remembered for his commitment to civil rights and his efforts to rebuild the nation after the Civil War, his presidency was also marked by political corruption, which tarnished his legacy during and after his time in office. The scandals that plagued his administration, particularly the Credit Mobilia scandal and the Whiskey Ring scandal, painted a picture of a presidency often mired in political strife and unethical dealings. Many of his political appointments were criticized for their involvement in corruption, though it is important to note that Grant himself was never personally implicated in these scandals. Nonetheless, Grant's commitment to Reconstruction and his support for the rights of freed African Americans should not be overlooked. His administration worked to pass the 15th Amendment, which granted African American men the right to vote and enforced the civil rights of African Americans in the South, despite strong resistance from Southern white supremacist groups. Grant took decisive action against the Ku Klux Klan, signing into law the enforcement acts to suppress their violent efforts to disenfranchise African Americans and maintain white dominance in the South. His actions during this time, particularly his efforts to support Reconstruction and protect civil rights, were critical in the years following the war and set a precedent for future civil rights movements. Grant's post-presidential life also played a significant role in shaping his legacy. After leaving office, he struggled financially due to a failed business venture, which added further difficulty to his already complex post-presidency. However, in his final years, Grant found a sense of redemption through his memoirs. His decision to write a candid account of his military experiences and the events of the Civil War, despite facing his own financial ruin, would prove to be one of his most enduring contributions. The memoirs, published after his death, became one of the most important historical works of the 19th century and were instrumental in restoring Grant's reputation. His candid reflections on the war and his military leadership offered future generations a profound and unvarnished look at the experiences of one of America's most significant historical figures. The success of his memoirs, which provided his family with financial stability, also ensured that Grant's story would be remembered not just for his triumphs, but for his personal integrity and struggle. The work's legacy lives on today, serving as a primary source for understanding the Civil War, particularly from the perspective of a leader who was deeply involved in its strategy and execution. Grant's legacy, as chronicled in his own words, helped to illuminate his character as a man of humility, focus, and resilience. Over the decades following his death, Grant's legacy has been reassessed and reevaluated. Historians have increasingly recognized his achievements, particularly in his military leadership and his determination to preserve the Union. While his presidency remains a topic of debate, Grant is often seen as a man of his time, a figure whose contributions during the Civil War and in the years of Reconstruction shaped the nation's future. In recent years, Grant's reputation has undergone a resurgence. Modern scholars have reassessed his presidency, acknowledging his commitment to civil rights and his personal integrity in the face of political and personal challenges. Grant's leadership during the Civil War and his role in the Reconstruction era have become central to discussions about the nation's efforts to heal the divisions caused by the war. His role in the passage of the 15th Amendment and his determination to protect the rights of African Americans in the South have earned him renewed admiration as a champion for justice, despite the flaws in his presidency. Grant's legacy, therefore, has been one of complexity. While he is revered for his military genius, his presidency reveals the limits of idealism and the difficulties of leading during a time of profound national division. Yet, it is clear that Grant's contribution to the preservation of the Union, his unwavering leadership during the Civil War, and his efforts during Reconstruction solidified his place as one of the most consequential figures in American history. Today, Ulysses S. Grant is remembered not only for his military leadership and political actions, but also for his character. His life is a testament to the qualities of perseverance, determination, and selflessness that helped shape the United States during its most trying moments. Whether as a general or a president, Grant's legacy endures as a symbol of the resilience of the Union, the pursuit of justice, and the ability to navigate personal and public challenges with integrity. After the Civil War, one of the most pressing challenges for the United States was the reconstruction of the South. The war had decimated the South's infrastructure, and the question of how to rebuild the Southern economy and society while integrating the newly freed African American population into the social, political, and economic fabric of the country was a monumental task. Ulysses S. Grant's leadership during the post-war period was central to shaping the trajectory of Reconstruction, as he faced not only the division of the nation, but also the political and racial tensions that continued to simmer in the aftermath of the war. As president, Grant inherited the difficult legacy of Reconstruction, which had begun under President Abraham Lincoln and continued into the years following Lincoln's assassination. The central goals of Reconstruction were to rebuild the South, re-establish the Southern states in the Union, and protect the civil rights of African Americans, who had been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. However, the Reconstruction process faced fierce opposition from white supremacists and former Confederates, who sought to maintain white dominance in the South through violence and intimidation. Grant's commitment to enforcing civil rights and supporting the Reconstruction process was a defining feature of his presidency. His administration worked to protect African American suffrage and to ensure that the Southern states complied with federal laws aimed at protecting the rights of freedmen. The passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans, was a significant achievement of Reconstruction. But these rights were often undermined in the South by discriminatory state laws and a violent resistance from white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. To combat this violent resistance, Grant took decisive action. In 1871, he signed the Enforcement Acts, which were designed to suppress the Ku Klux Klan and other similar groups that were terrorizing African Americans and preventing them from voting. The acts gave the federal government the authority to intervene in the South and use military force if necessary to protect the rights of African Americans. Grant's strong stance against the Klan and his willingness to deploy federal troops to enforce the law marked him as a president committed to civil rights, but it also made him a target for those who resented federal intervention. Despite Grant's efforts, Reconstruction faced growing challenges. By the mid-1870s, Northern support for Reconstruction had waned. The political climate in the North shifted as the country became more focused on economic issues and weary of the ongoing conflict in the South. The South, meanwhile, began to reassert its control, passing black codes and later Jim Crow laws that effectively disenfranchised African Americans and re-established a racial caste system. The 1876 presidential election further exposed the rifts in the nation. The contested election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden ultimately led to the Compromise of 1877. In exchange for Hayes being declared the winner of the election, he agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. The withdrawal of federal troops allowed white Southerners to regain control of state governments, and with it, the ability to implement laws that would undermine the civil rights of African Americans for decades to come. This marked the end of the Reconstruction era and the beginning of the oppressive Jim Crow system that would persist in the South until the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. For Grant, the end of Reconstruction was a bitter disappointment. Although he had worked tirelessly to ensure that African Americans were protected by federal law, the withdrawal of federal troops and the loss of political will in the North led to the undoing of many of his efforts. The political and social landscape of the South shifted, and the progress made during Reconstruction was reversed, leaving a legacy of inequality and injustice that would endure for generations. However, despite the challenges of Reconstruction, Grant's legacy as a defender of civil rights remains an important part of his historical record. His firm stance against white supremacist violence, his support for African American suffrage, and his commitment to enforcing federal laws protecting civil rights were pivotal during a time when the country was deeply divided. While Reconstruction did not achieve all of its goals, Grant's actions helped set the stage for the civil rights advancements that would come in the 20th century. In the years following his presidency, as the country moved further away from Reconstruction, Grant remained an outspoken advocate for the rights of African Americans. He continued to support civil rights causes and voiced his opposition to the injustices of the post-Reconstruction South. In his later years, Grant worked with various civil rights organizations and supported the efforts to ensure that African Americans had access to the same opportunities as white citizens. Grant's presidency and his role in Reconstruction ultimately left a legacy of both progress and disappointment. While he made significant strides in protecting the rights of African Americans, the political realities of the time, combined with the resistance from the South, meant that many of his efforts were undermined in the long run. Nevertheless, his legacy as a defender of civil rights and his contributions to the Union's victory during the Civil War have left an indelible mark on American history. Despite the setbacks, Grant's legacy in the broader context of American history should not be underestimated. His leadership during the war preserved the Union, and his efforts during Reconstruction, while ultimately incomplete, demonstrated his commitment to justice and equality. He may not have fully succeeded in achieving the promises of Reconstruction, but his actions set the foundation for the future fight for civil rights, which would be taken up by others in the 20th century. After leaving the presidency in 1877, Ulysses S. Grant faced a new chapter in his life, one that was filled with personal challenges, but also opportunities to reflect on the work he had done for his country. Though his time in the White House was marked by political struggles, scandals, and the unraveling of Reconstruction, Grant's post-presidential years were a period of significant change. He shifted from a political figure deeply involved in domestic affairs to a man who traveled the world, established new connections, and worked to secure his family's financial future. In the years following his presidency, Grant began a journey of rehabilitation, trying to restore both his personal finances and his reputation, which had been marred by the corruption scandals during his time in office. He was thrust into the public eye again in 1880, when he became the Republican Party's nominee for a third presidential term. Despite his declining popularity, especially after the scandals during his presidency, Grant remained a beloved figure for many. However, his bid for a third term ended in defeat, and he withdrew from political life to focus on other endeavors. With the pressing financial struggles caused by his failed business ventures, Grant sought to turn his financial situation around. A crucial turning point came in 1884 when, after a series of unsuccessful investments, he began writing his memoirs. His decision to write about his Civil War experiences and his presidency proved to be a significant moment in his post-presidential life. As he started work on the memoirs, Grant took an unflinching approach, writing candidly about his military leadership and the hardships he faced during his presidency. The decision to write his memoirs came at a time when Grant's health was already deteriorating due to the onset of throat cancer. Despite the heavy toll of the disease, Grant found purpose in his writing. The memoirs were not only a personal project, but a way for Grant to ensure his legacy would be accurately preserved for future generations. He collaborated with Mark Twain, a longtime friend who helped him secure a publishing deal, and in 1885 the first volume was published. The memoirs quickly became a literary success and were widely praised for their honesty and clarity. Grant's portrayal of the Civil War and his personal reflections on his military decisions contributed significantly to the historical understanding of the war. The success of his memoirs did more than restore Grant's financial stability. It provided a sense of closure to his long public service career. With the funds from the memoirs, he was able to pay off debts accumulated during his post-presidential years. Grant's financial recovery, however, was bittersweet, as his health continued to deteriorate and he knew his time was short. His work on the memoirs, completed with remarkable dedication despite the physical toll of his illness, became a defining element of his final years. During this time, Grant's influence was not confined to the pages of his memoirs. His post-presidential years also marked a period of significant international recognition. In 1877, Grant embarked on a world tour, visiting several countries in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. This trip helped to elevate Grant's global stature as a symbol of American leadership and military achievement. In countries like Britain, France, and Egypt, Grant was treated as a hero. His visit to England was particularly notable, as he was welcomed by Queen Victoria and other leading British figures, who admired him for his role in securing Union victory in the Civil War. Grant's world tour brought him into contact with key figures and diplomatic leaders from around the globe, allowing him to solidify America's place on the world stage. Though Grant's global influence was largely symbolic, his travels showcase the extent to which his leadership during the Civil War had made him a respected figure internationally. The war, after all, was not just a domestic conflict. It was a battle that had implications for international politics, particularly in the context of slavery, democracy, and national sovereignty. As a symbol of the Union's struggle and victory, Grant's influence extended beyond American borders, serving as a reminder of the resilience and strength of the United States. Throughout these post-presidential years, Grant also remained connected to American politics, albeit in a less direct manner. His name was often associated with political reform movements, and with the broader struggle to ensure the continuation of the policies of Reconstruction. Though Grant himself was no longer directly involved in active politics, his stance on civil rights and his advocacy for African American suffrage continued to shape political discourse in the years following his presidency. Despite the various personal and political challenges of his later years, Grant's commitment to the welfare of the United States and his sense of duty never wavered. The world tour, the memoirs, and his financial recovery represented a final phase in his life where, though his health was in decline, he continued to reflect on his legacy, both as a soldier and as a leader of the country. In his last months, Grant's thoughts were occupied with securing a future for his family, ensuring that his memoirs would provide for them financially. He had faced many challenges in his personal life, but the financial success of his writing brought him peace in his final days. Grant passed away on July 23, 1885, after a painful struggle with throat cancer. His death marked the end of an era, and the nation mourned the loss of a leader who had shaped its history in ways that few others could. At the time of his death, Grant was still regarded by many as a hero, but his contributions were often viewed with mixed feelings due to the complexities of his presidency and the corruption scandals that plagued his administration. Nevertheless, his role in the Civil War and his post-war leadership continued to be seen as central to the preservation of the Union and the freedoms that would eventually be extended to all Americans regardless of race. In the final year of his life, Ulysses Grant's physical health deteriorated rapidly, but his inner strength and sense of duty remained steadfast. Diagnosed with throat cancer in 1884, Grant faced a relentless battle against the disease, which robbed him of his ability to speak and eat, but never his resolve. He knew that time was short, yet his unwavering spirit and his determination to complete his memoirs kept him focused. Despite the pain, he worked diligently to finish his work, which he knew would provide for his family after he was gone. His final months were marked by both personal suffering and remarkable endurance, encapsulating the strength of character that had defined him throughout his life. Grant's battle with cancer began in the spring of 1884. His voice began to falter, and the pain he experienced worsened as the disease progressed. Grant, ever the stoic soldier, refused to allow the illness to define his last months. His personal courage during this time was a reflection of the qualities that had made him such an admired figure. Despite the agony, Grant continued to write, focusing on completing the memoirs that had become his priority. He saw this as his last chance to leave a lasting legacy, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that the account of his military career would be honest, straightforward, and complete. As the disease advanced, Grant's condition worsened. He was often confined to his bed, and his inability to speak caused him great frustration. But his determination to finish what he had started never wavered. His family, particularly his devoted wife Julia, remained by his side throughout his illness, offering both physical and emotional support. Julia had been a pillar of strength for Grant throughout their marriage, and during these final months her support was invaluable. Despite the difficult circumstances, Grant remained composed, rarely showing signs of distress, and his resolve to finish his memoirs was a testament to his commitment to his family and his legacy. Grant's doctors, who had been monitoring his condition, were pessimistic about his chances of recovery. The cancer had spread, and it was clear that there was no hope for remission, but Grant continued to work on his memoirs, often writing in great pain. He completed the final chapters in early July 1885, just days before his death. Grant's decision to complete his memoirs was an act of both personal redemption and a final gift to his family. The proceeds from the book would provide financial security for Julia and their children, ensuring that his family was taken care of after he was gone. This act of responsibility in the face of his own mortality was a fitting conclusion to a life marked by duty, sacrifice, and honor. On July 23rd, 1885, Ulysses S. Grant passed away. He died at the age of 63, having lived a life that was both extraordinary and deeply human. His death marked the end of an era, a period that had seen the United States through its most trying moments, from the Civil War to the challenges of Reconstruction. Grant's passing was met with an outpouring of national mourning. People across the country, from high-ranking officials to ordinary citizens, expressed their sorrow at the loss of a leader who had guided the nation through its darkest hours. Flags flew at half-staff, and memorial services were held in cities across the United States to honor the man who had played such a critical role in shaping the country's future. Grant's funeral, held in New York City, was a grand and somber occasion. Thousands of people lined the streets to pay their respects, and prominent figures, including military leaders and political leaders, attended the ceremony. His coffin was draped in the American flag, and the procession was a reflection of the deep respect and admiration that Grant had earned during his lifetime. His final resting place was in the Riverside Park Mausoleum in New York City, where his tomb remains today as a testament to his enduring legacy. Despite the political controversies that had surrounded his presidency, Grant's death marked the end of a chapter in American history. His legacy as a leader, both in the military and in the White House, was assured. While his presidency had faced criticism, especially for the corruption that marred his administration, his role in preserving the Union during the Civil War and his leadership during Reconstruction remained central to his historical importance. His efforts to enforce civil rights for African Americans, even in the face of intense opposition, were part of his enduring commitment to justice and equality. Grant's legacy, as seen in his leadership during the Civil War and his efforts to secure the freedoms of newly freed African Americans, was not fully appreciated during his lifetime. However, as time passed, his contributions to the United States became more apparent, and his reputation grew. His military genius, his unwavering commitment to the Union cause, and his leadership in ensuring the survival of the nation were recognized as monumental achievements. His role in the preservation of the Union and his stand against the forces of white supremacy during Reconstruction were essential to the future of the country. In the years after his death, Grant's legacy was celebrated not only for his military victories, but for his ability to serve the country with honor, regardless of the challenges he faced. His memoirs, which had been completed in the final months of his life, became a lasting historical document and were praised for their clarity, honesty, and insight into the Civil War. They offered a first-hand account of the war from one of the most significant figures in American history, and they cemented his place in the nation's historical narrative. Ulysses S. Grant's death in 1885 marked the conclusion of a life that had profoundly shaped American history, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter in his legacy. Although his presidency had faced significant criticism, particularly over the scandals that marred his administration, it was his military leadership and his final work, the memoirs, that would ultimately define how he would be remembered for generations to come. The publication of his memoirs in the months after his death not only provided his family with the financial security they desperately needed, but also became one of the most important historical documents of the 19th century, offering valuable insights into the Civil War and Grant's personal reflections on his leadership and decisions. Grant's memoirs, titled Personal Memoirs of Ulysses Grant, were completed during the final months of his life, with the final chapters written as he battled throat cancer. Despite the pain and suffering he endured, Grant dedicated himself to writing a detailed, honest account of his military career. In the process, he provided a candid and unvarnished view of the Civil War, offering first-hand accounts of battles, decisions, and interactions with other key figures such as Robert E. Lee, William Tecumseh Sherman, and Abraham Lincoln. His memoirs are known for their clarity, directness, and humility, qualities that were not always present in the writings of military commanders. The impact of personal memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant was immediate and profound. The work was published in 2 volumes in 1885, just months after his death, and became an instant success. Critics and readers alike praised Grant's writing for its honesty and insight, particularly regarding the military strategies that led to Union victory. Grant's accounts of battles such as Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and the final campaign against Lee's forces gave a detailed, personal perspective on the events that had defined the Civil War. His analysis of strategy, command, and the intricacies of war-making would go on to influence future generations of military leaders and historians. Perhaps most striking in Grant's memoirs was his unflinching honesty about his own decisions and mistakes. He did not seek to portray himself as a flawless leader. Instead, he openly acknowledged his missteps and reflected on the difficulties of commanding during one of the bloodiest wars in history. His discussion of the strategic decisions he made and the consequences of those decisions provides a rare glimpse into the mind of one of the most significant military leaders in American history. Grant's willingness to write candidly about his leadership, his struggles, and his reflections on the war helped to humanize him, making his memoirs both a historical document and a deeply personal account of his experiences. The publication of Grant's memoirs not only helped to restore his reputation, but also secured his place in American literary history. The work became a cornerstone for Civil War scholarship. Widely regarded as one of the most authoritative accounts of the conflict, his memoirs remain an essential source for historians, providing invaluable insight into the Union Army's strategies and the leadership decisions that ultimately led to the war's conclusion. The financial success of the memoirs also had a profound impact on Grant's family. The royalties from the book allowed his widow, Julia, and their children to live comfortably, providing them with a sense of security after years of financial strain. Grant's completion of the memoirs, despite his deteriorating health, was an act of final devotion to his family. His commitment to ensuring their well-being, even in his last days, left an enduring mark on their lives. In the years following Grant's death, his memoirs continued to shape his legacy. They not only solidified his place as a military genius, but also highlighted his personal character, his humility, perseverance, and dedication to duty. As the years passed, Grant's reputation as a president continued to be reassessed. While his presidency had been controversial, particularly due to the corruption scandals that occurred during his administration, his efforts to preserve the Union during the Civil War and his commitment to civil rights were increasingly recognized. As vital to the nation's survival and healing, the legacy of Grant's memoirs has only grown over time. They have been widely published, studied, and revered as one of the most significant works of American history. As the years went by, historians began to place more value on Grant's presidency, particularly his efforts to enforce civil rights for African Americans during Reconstruction. His leadership during the war, his role in preserving the Union, and his commitment to equality have led many to reevaluate his presidency as one of considerable importance, despite the challenges and scandals that overshadowed it during his time in office. Today, Grant's memoirs are still regarded as a critical piece of American literature, one of the finest examples of military memoirs ever written. They are still taught in classrooms, read by military leaders, and used as a key text in the study of the Civil War. Grant's insights into war strategy, leadership, and the burdens of command remain relevant to this day, offering invaluable lessons for anyone studying the history of warfare or leadership. Grant's memoirs also helped to restore his reputation in the broader cultural memory of the United States. Although the post-war period has been marked by division over issues such as Reconstruction and civil rights, the publication of his memoirs allowed the country to see Grant in a new light, not only as a military leader, but also as a writer and a man who had lived a life of service to his country. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Grant's legacy has continued to be celebrated and debated. He is often hailed as one of the greatest American generals, and his leadership during the Civil War is widely acknowledged as critical to the preservation of the United States. The complexities of his presidency, particularly during Reconstruction, are still examined and critiqued, but his efforts to safeguard civil rights and rebuild the South remain central to his legacy. Grant's final work, the personal memoirs, left a lasting imprint on history, cementing his place as one of the most significant figures in American history. His words continue to resonate, offering both a historical document and a deeply personal reflection of a man who dedicated his life to his country in ways few others have. As the years passed after Ulysses S. Grant's death, his legacy underwent a gradual transformation. During his presidency, Grant had faced criticism for political corruption and for the challenges associated with Reconstruction. His post-presidential years, marked by financial struggles, further complicated his public image. Yet, as time went on, especially in the 20th century, Grant's reputation began to experience a significant revival, particularly in the realms of military history, leadership, and his contributions to civil rights. A key factor in this restoration was the publication of his memoirs. The personal memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant, which had been completed in the final months of his life, continued to resonate with readers and historians long after his death. The candid, straightforward account of his military career and the Civil War had proven to be a valuable historical document, and Grant's insightful reflections on the war, his leadership, and his personal experiences elevated him in the eyes of many Americans. Scholars and historians began to reevaluate his legacy, recognizing his military genius, his integrity, and his resilience in the face of adversity. The success of his memoirs, which had provided financial stability for his family, also led to a reassessment of Grant's presidency. While the corruption scandals that had plagued his administration remained a topic of discussion, the broader scope of his leadership began to be recognized for its long-term impact on the nation. The reality of Grant's role in preserving the Union during the Civil War and his determination to fight for civil rights in the South after the war became increasingly appreciated, though Reconstruction had ultimately faltered and the South had largely reverted to its former state of oppression. Grant's unwavering efforts to protect the rights of freedmen and enforce the Reconstruction Amendments were viewed as essential to the larger fight for equality in America. By the early 20th century, historians and political commentators began to cast Grant in a more favorable light. Scholars acknowledged that his presidency, despite its flaws, had laid the foundation for future civil rights advancements. Grant's staunch defense of African American voting rights, his use of federal power to suppress the Ku Klux Klan, and his advocacy for the 15th Amendment earned him recognition as an early champion of racial justice. These aspects of his legacy, often overshadowed by the corruption scandals during his time in office, were increasingly celebrated. Grant's military leadership, particularly his role as a general during the Civil War, became central to his revitalized reputation. As the 20th century progressed, the focus on military history grew, and Grant's victories at Vicksburg, Chattanooga, and Appomattox were hailed as major achievements in American military strategy. Scholars and military professionals began to study Grant's tactics, recognizing his ability to make bold, calculated decisions under pressure, his ability to coordinate large armies, his use of total war tactics, and his unrelenting pursuit of victory became lessons for future generations of military leaders. His leadership style, marked by determination, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to his goals, was admired by those studying warfare. Grant's posthumous rehabilitation continued throughout the 20th century, culminating in the recognition of his historical significance and his role in shaping modern American identity. In 1930, the nation celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Civil War, and Grant's legacy was increasingly seen in a more positive light. His contributions were placed alongside those of other great figures in American history, and he was recognized as a central figure in the preservation of the Union and the fight for justice and equality. In the mid-20th century, the civil rights movement added another layer to Grant's legacy. As African Americans fought for their rights in the 1950s and 1960s, Grant's efforts during Reconstruction were revisited with renewed appreciation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which were major legislative victories for African Americans, echoed Grant's earlier efforts to ensure civil rights and voting rights for freed slaves. The comparison between Grant's leadership during Reconstruction and the efforts of civil rights leaders in the 20th century highlighted his importance as a precursor to the more modern civil rights struggles. In the 21st century, Ulysses S., Grant's reputation as both a military leader and a president continued to evolve. His reputation as a military commander reached new heights, with scholars and historians praising his tactical brilliance and his role in securing Union victory. His presidency, while still acknowledged for its imperfections, came to be seen more as an essential part of the Reconstruction effort, a time in American history that set the stage for the civil rights advances of the 20th century. The physical monuments to Grant's legacy also flourished. In 1911, the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial was dedicated in Washington, D.C., a towering tribute to his role in the Civil War. The memorial, located near the Capitol building, stands as a reminder of his importance to the nation. In addition, his tomb, located at Riverside Park in New York City, remains one of the most visited sites in the city, attracting visitors who come to honor his military and presidential contributions. As the years passed, Grant's place in American history was further solidified. His memoirs, widely regarded as one of the finest examples of military memoirs ever written, continue to be studied in classrooms across the country. His role in shaping the United States through his leadership during the Civil War and his presidency during the Reconstruction era ensures that he remains a central figure in the nation's narrative. In the 21st century, as the United States continues to grapple with issues of racial justice and equality, Grant's legacy as a proponent of civil rights during Reconstruction remains relevant. Though his presidency did not achieve all the goals of Reconstruction, his unwavering commitment to civil rights and his use of federal power to suppress white supremacist violence remain important aspects of his enduring legacy. Ulysses S. Grant's life, once marked by controversy and division, is now viewed through a lens of appreciation for his service to the nation, his military leadership, and his commitment to the ideals of freedom and equality. His legacy, built on both his triumphs and his struggles, has been restored and cemented as an integral part of American history. Ulysses S. Grant's presidency, spanning from 1869 to 1877, was marked by significant efforts to enforce civil rights, particularly for African Americans in the post-Civil War South. Following the Union's victory, the nation faced the daunting task of reintegrating the Southern states, addressing the condition of former slaves, and securing civil rights protections for newly freed African Americans. As president, Grant was deeply committed to the ideals of Reconstruction and the protection of civil rights, though his tenure also faced political opposition and challenges from those who sought to roll back the progress made during and after the war. One of the most important aspects of Grant's presidency was his unwavering commitment to enforcing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which abolished slavery, granted citizenship to African Americans, and protected voting rights, respectively. These amendments laid the foundation for civil rights in the United States, but they needed to be enforced in the face of fierce resistance from the South, where many white Southerners were determined to preserve their pre-war way of life. Grant's administration passed several key laws to protect African Americans from violence and discrimination. The most significant of these was the Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871, which gave the federal government the power to intervene in southern states to protect African Americans and suppress the violent activities of groups like the Ku Klux Klan. These acts allowed the federal government to arrest and prosecute individuals who tried to prevent African Americans from voting or engaging in other civil rights activities. Grant's administration used federal troops to crack down on the Ku Klux Klan, successfully reducing its influence and violent intimidation in many parts of the South. One of the central goals of Grant's presidency was to ensure that African Americans were able to vote freely. The 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, granted African American men the right to vote, but the implementation of this right was fiercely contested in many southern states. White supremacist groups used intimidation, violence, and fraud to prevent African Americans from exercising their rights. In response, Grant worked to pass laws that would protect African American voters from these tactics. He also ordered federal troops to be stationed in the South to oversee elections and protect African Americans from violence at the polls. Grant's efforts to enforce civil rights were not without resistance, both from within the South and from Northern politicians who were growing weary of Reconstruction. By the mid-1870s, the political climate in the North had shifted, and there was a growing desire to end federal intervention in the South. As a result, the Southern states gradually regained control of their own affairs, and the withdrawal of federal troops allowed discriminatory laws and practices to flourish once more. Despite these challenges, Grant's legacy in the realm of civil rights remained significant. He is often regarded as one of the most proactive presidents in terms of advocating for African American rights, particularly in his use of federal power to enforce the 15th Amendment and combat white supremacist violence. His administration was the first to take a strong stance against the Ku Klux Klan, and his efforts laid the groundwork for future civil rights advancements. Another critical aspect of Grant's presidency was his focus on rebuilding the South's economy and infrastructure. The Civil War had left the southern states devastated, with much of their infrastructure destroyed and their economy in shambles. Grant's administration worked to help the South recover, both financially and physically, while also ensuring that the rights of African Americans were protected. Grant supported policies aimed at reintegrating southern states into the Union, but he also emphasized the importance of guaranteeing the rights of freed slaves. He advocated for policies that would provide land and resources to African Americans and help them achieve economic independence. However, Grant's efforts to rebuild the South were complicated by the broader political and economic climate of the time. Reconstruction had become increasingly unpopular in the North, and many Northerners were eager to move on from the issues of race and slavery. By the end of Grant's second term, political fatigue and corruption had undermined much of the progress made during the early years of Reconstruction. The Compromise of 1877, which ended Reconstruction, marked the withdrawal of federal troops from the South and the end of federal enforcement of civil rights laws. Though Grant's presidency did not result in the full realization of the promises of Reconstruction, his role in advocating for civil rights remains an important aspect of his legacy. His commitment to ensuring the rights of African Americans and his use of federal power to protect them laid the foundation for future civil rights movements. The setbacks of Reconstruction were not the result of Grant's lack of effort or conviction, but rather the shifting political tides and the deep-rooted resistance to racial equality in the South. In the years following Grant's presidency, the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century would build on the foundations laid during his time in office. The fight for racial justice and equality would continue, and Grant's role in that struggle would be increasingly recognized as central to the history of American civil rights. Though his presidency was marred by political scandals and the eventual failure of Reconstruction, his advocacy for African Americans and his commitment to justice remain vital to understanding his place in American history. After the end of his presidency in 1877, Ulysses S. Grant sought to return to private life, but his post-presidential years were marked by a mixture of political involvement, personal struggles, and financial setbacks. Though his time in office was contentious, especially due to the scandals that clouded his administration, Grant remained a figure of national importance, and his name was frequently invoked in political discussions during the late 19th century. Despite this, his political career after leaving office was marked by efforts to help the country heal from the divisions of the Civil War while dealing with his own personal difficulties. One of the most notable events in Grant's post-presidential life came in 1880, when he was once again urged by his supporters to run for the presidency. This was in the midst of a period of political instability for the Republican Party, which was divided over how to approach issues such as civil rights, corruption, and the future of the Reconstruction era. Grant's supporters hoped that his return to the presidency would restore order and help address the issues that had plagued the country during the post-war years. Despite his personal hesitations and the many obstacles he faced, Grant agreed to be nominated for a third term as president. His candidacy sparked significant political debate, especially among the Republican Party's factions, who were divided between the so-called stalwarts, who wanted to maintain the political status quo, and the half-breeds, who called for political reform. Although Grant had a strong following among the stalwarts, his bid for a third term was met with resistance from other factions within his own party. At the Republican National Convention of 1880, Grant came close to winning the nomination, but ultimately fell short. After multiple ballots and intense political maneuvering, the party chose James A. Garfield as its candidate. Garfield's victory in the nomination meant that Grant's hopes for a return to the White House were dashed, but his brief foray into the political arena once again demonstrated his enduring influence. Grant's candidacy, despite its failure, underscored the deep respect and admiration he continued to command from many segments of the American public. Grant's political influence did not end with his failed attempt to secure a third term. In the years that followed, his name continued to be associated with political reform and with the struggle for the preservation of civil rights. However, his political career during this period was not marked by active leadership, but rather by symbolic gestures and his advocacy for certain political principles, especially those related to the rights of African Americans and the legacy of Reconstruction. As Grant's post-presidential years continued, he also found himself confronting his own financial difficulties. After leaving office, Grant struggled with managing his personal finances, particularly after a failed business venture involving a fraudulent investment. This financial setback left Grant in a precarious position, and his personal debt became a burden that he struggled to overcome. At this point, Grant's memoirs would play a crucial role in restoring his financial security and allowing him to provide for his family after the loss of his business fortune. Despite these financial challenges, Grant remained committed to public service. Though no longer in a formal political role, he continued to advocate for the policies he had supported during his presidency, particularly those aimed at securing civil rights for African Americans. His efforts to ensure that the post-war South remained committed to the rights of freedmen were a crucial part of his legacy, even as the political tide turned against Reconstruction after his time in office. Though Grant's efforts to protect civil rights during his presidency had faced resistance from Southern Democrats and other white supremacist groups, his commitment to equality remained a significant part of his post-presidential identity. Grant's final years, however, were not solely marked by financial struggles or political maneuvering. As his health deteriorated from throat cancer, he focused on his family and completing the final chapters of his memoirs. Writing his memoirs gave Grant a sense of purpose in his final months, allowing him to reflect on his military career, the trials of his presidency, and his personal growth throughout the years. The memoirs, completed just days before his death, would secure his family's future and cement his place in history as a military leader and a man of integrity. In the broader context of American history, Grant's post-presidential years serve as a reminder of the shifting political landscape of the late 19th century. The period following the Civil War was one of intense political conflict, as the nation grappled with the legacies of slavery, Reconstruction, and the reintegration of the South into the Union. Grant's efforts during this time to promote civil rights, despite the challenges he faced, helped lay the groundwork for the civil rights movements of the 20th century. Though Grant's bid for a third term was unsuccessful, his legacy as a defender of the Union, as a leader during Reconstruction, and as a proponent of African American civil rights continued to resonate throughout the late 19th century and beyond. While his later years were marked by personal struggles, both financially and health-wise, the work he did to preserve the Union and his unwavering commitment to justice and equality continue to be his defining legacy. Ulysses S. Grant's legacy as a military leader is arguably the most enduring aspect of his historical significance. While his presidency faced considerable challenges, including corruption scandals and the eventual failure of Reconstruction, Grant's military career remains a defining part of his place in American history. His role as the commanding general of the Union Army during the Civil War ensured the preservation of the United States, and his strategies, leadership, and perseverance in the face of adversity have made him a model for military leaders around the world. Grant's approach to warfare was marked by an unwavering determination to secure victory for the Union, regardless of the cost. Unlike many of his predecessors, Grant was willing to engage in total war, understanding that the conflict would not be resolved through piecemeal victories, but through sustained pressure on the Confederate Army. His strategy, particularly in the latter years of the war, emphasized relentless pursuit, attrition, and the application of force to break the Confederacy's ability to fight. This approach proved highly effective, culminating in the Confederate surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. Grant's strategic brilliance is most evident in key campaigns such as the Battle of Vicksburg, the Battle of Chattanooga, and the final campaigns in Virginia against Robert E. Lee. At Vicksburg, Grant's siege tactics forced the Confederate forces to surrender, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. His victory at Chattanooga, followed by the successful use of reinforcements, helped to secure the Union Army's foothold in the South. Finally, Grant's relentless pursuit of Lee's forces in the Overland Campaign and the subsequent siege of Petersburg demonstrated his understanding of the war's larger strategic goals. Grant's military leadership was characterized by his ability to adapt to changing circumstances and his willingness to take risks when necessary. He was not deterred by setbacks or temporary defeats. Instead, he learned from them and adjusted his tactics. His ability to maintain focus on the ultimate goal, Union victory, was central to his success. His leadership style was also marked by a deep understanding of the importance of morale and maintaining the cohesion of his forces. Grant's relationship with his generals, particularly William Tecumseh Sherman and Philip Sheridan, was instrumental in achieving victory. He was known for giving his subordinates the freedom to act decisively, trusting them to execute his vision. Grant's victories during the Civil War had a profound impact on military history, not just in the United States but globally. His approach to total war influenced military leaders around the world, and his emphasis on the strategic use of resources, the importance of logistics, and the necessity of maintaining constant pressure on the enemy became key tenets of modern warfare. His success in coordinating large, complex campaigns was ahead of its time, and his ability to understand the broader strategic picture set him apart from many of his contemporaries. In the years following the Civil War, Grant's military legacy continued to be studied and respected by military academies and leaders. His tactics were analyzed and applied in later conflicts, and his leadership was held up as an example for future generals. Throughout the 20th century, Grant's contributions to American military history were acknowledged as central to the Union victory, and his role in shaping the nature of modern warfare became more widely understood. Grant's military legacy is also reflected in the ways in which he's been remembered by the American public. Monuments to Grant, such as the Grant Memorial in Washington, D.C., and his tomb at Riverside Park in New York City, serve as lasting symbols of his contributions to the country. The Grant Memorial, dedicated in 1921, features a statue of Grant on horseback, flanked by other figures that represent the key moments of his military career. The memorial stands as a tribute to his leadership and to the role he played in shaping the outcome of the Civil War. Grant's leadership and military genius have continued to resonate in the years since his death. His memoirs, published posthumously, not only provide a detailed account of his military campaigns, but also offer a window into the mind of one of the most significant military leaders in history. Grant's decision to write candidly about his strategies, mistakes, and personal experiences has made his memoirs an invaluable resource for historians and military professionals alike. His ability to reflect on his decisions, both good and bad, has made his memoirs one of the most highly regarded military accounts ever written. In the years since the Civil War, Grant's legacy as a military leader has been the subject of ongoing study and debate. While his presidency remains controversial, particularly due to the political challenges of Reconstruction and the corruption scandals, his role in the Civil War is widely celebrated. Historians continue to study his tactics, his leadership style, and his strategic decisions, recognizing the profound impact they had on the outcome of the war. Grant's place in American military history is secure. He's remembered not only for his victories, but for the qualities that defined his leadership. His perseverance, his ability to make tough decisions under pressure, and his unwavering commitment to the Union cause. His ability to lead an army through a long and bloody conflict, his understanding of the importance of logistics and resources, and his willingness to pursue victory at all costs have made him one of the most respected figures in American military history. Ulysses Grant's influence on American leadership extended far beyond his time as a military commander and president. His legacy continues to resonate not only through the victories of the Civil War, but also in his ability to guide the nation through its most divisive and transformative period. As the Union's most prominent general, Grant's leadership was central to the preservation of the United States, and his principles of determination, resilience, and national unity set a precedent for future generations of leaders. In many ways, Grant's leadership style embodied the principles of duty, honor, and sacrifice. His commitment to these ideals during the Civil War, when the stakes were highest, reflected his broader vision for the future of the country. Though his presidency faced political challenges and was marred by corruption scandals, Grant's unwavering dedication to the Union and the values it represented remained central to his personal identity. Grant's impact as a leader can be seen in the way he approached both military command and his presidency. As a military leader, Grant's unyielding determination and focus on achieving victory, despite significant obstacles, set him apart from other commanders. He was willing to accept the costs of war in order to secure the Union's future, and his ability to press forward after setbacks demonstrated his unique approach to leadership. He understood that victory was not always about achieving immediate results, but about staying the course and maintaining the larger vision. This approach carried over into his presidency, where Grant's commitment to national unity was evident in his efforts to enforce the principles of Reconstruction and to protect the rights of freed African Americans. He understood that the survival of the Union depended on addressing the injustices of the past, and his actions during Reconstruction, although imperfect, were an attempt to ensure that the country would heal after the Civil War. Grant's leadership during the Reconstruction era laid the foundation for the civil rights movements of the 20th century. His advocacy for the 15th Amendment, his efforts to suppress white supremacist violence, and his focus on protecting African American voting rights showed a deep commitment to equality. Though his presidency saw the eventual collapse of Reconstruction in the face of growing Southern resistance, his efforts to lay the groundwork for racial equality helped to shift the national conversation about civil rights, making it an issue that future leaders would be forced to confront. Beyond his actions during the Civil War and Reconstruction, Grant's leadership influenced the broader narrative of American identity. His steadfast commitment to the preservation of the Union and his belief in the power of the federal government to protect individual rights established a vision of American leadership grounded in national unity and democratic ideals. Even in the face of political setbacks and societal resistance, Grant's leadership was rooted in the belief that the country's greatest strength lay in its ability to remain united. Grant's influence on American leadership also extended internationally. During his post-presidential years, he served as a symbol of American power and resolve, particularly during his world tour in the late 1870s. In countries across Europe, Africa, and Asia, Grant was recognized as a figure who had helped preserve the United States and who represented the strength of democratic ideals. His diplomatic efforts and his ability to represent the United States on the global stage further cemented his place as a leader of both national and international significance. In the years following his death, Grant's influence on leadership and national unity continued to be felt. His example as a leader who valued perseverance, duty, and a commitment to justice became a model for future generations of American leaders. The qualities that defined his leadership, his determination, focus, and ability to navigate complex political and military challenges, were recognized as central to the success of the United States during one of its most trying periods. Grant's legacy as a leader also shaped the broader conversation about national identity and unity. In the years after his death, as the country faced new challenges and periods of division, Grant's example continued to serve as a touchstone for those seeking to unite the country and move forward. His leadership during the Civil War and Reconstruction provided a model of how a nation could overcome its greatest internal conflict and begin the process of healing and rebuilding. Today, Grant's influence is still seen in the way American leadership is defined. His ability to stay true to his principles, despite the enormous challenges he faced, remains a point of admiration. His leadership qualities, his courage, humility, and unwavering sense of duty continue to resonate in discussions of leadership in both the military and political realms. Ulysses S. Grant's leadership set a precedent for future generations, not just in terms of military strategy or presidential actions, but in his commitment to the greater good of the nation. His ability to prioritize the long-term unity of the United States over personal ambition, and his focus on upholding the ideals of freedom and justice, serve as guiding principles for American leadership. His legacy, marked by both triumph and tragedy, continues to shape the way leaders are remembered and how leadership is understood in the context of the nation's ongoing journey toward unity and equality. Ulysses S. Grant's influence on American leadership extended far beyond his time as a military commander and president. His legacy continues to resonate not only through the victories of the Civil War, but also in his ability to guide the nation through its most divisive and transformative period. As the Union's most prominent general, Grant's leadership was central to the preservation of the United States, and his principles of determination, resilience, and national unity set a precedent for future generations of leaders. In many ways, Grant's leadership style embodied the principles of duty, honor, and sacrifice. His commitment to these ideals during the Civil War, when the stakes were highest, reflected his broader vision for the future of the country. Though his presidency faced political challenges and was marred by corruption scandals, Grant's unwavering dedication to the Union and the values it represented remained central to his personal identity. Grant's impact as a leader can be seen in the way he approached both military command and his presidency. As a military leader, Grant's unyielding determination and focus on achieving victory despite significant obstacles set him apart from other commanders. He was willing to accept the costs of war in order to secure the Union's future, and his ability to press forward after setbacks demonstrated his unique approach to leadership. He understood that victory was not always about achieving immediate results, but about staying the course and maintaining the larger vision. This approach carried over into his presidency, where Grant's commitment to national unity was evident in his efforts to enforce the principles of Reconstruction and to protect the rights of freed African Americans. He understood that the survival of the Union depended on addressing the injustices of the past, and his actions during Reconstruction, although imperfect, were an attempt to ensure that the country would heal after the Civil War. Grant's leadership during the Reconstruction era laid the foundation for the civil rights movements of the 20th century. His advocacy for the 15th Amendment, his efforts to suppress white supremacist violence, and his focus on protecting African American voting rights showed a deep commitment to equality. Though his presidency saw the eventual collapse of Reconstruction in the face of growing Southern resistance, his efforts to lay the groundwork for racial equality helped to shift the national conversation about civil rights, making it an issue that future leaders would be forced to confront. Beyond his actions during the Civil War and Reconstruction, Grant's leadership influenced the broader narrative of American identity. His steadfast commitment to the preservation of the Union and his belief in the power of the federal government to protect individual rights established a vision of American leadership grounded in national unity and democratic ideals. Even in the face of political setbacks and societal resistance, Grant's leadership was rooted in the belief that the country's greatest strength lay in its ability to remain united. Grant's influence on American leadership also extended internationally. During his post-presidential years, he He served as a symbol of American power and resolve, particularly during his world tour in the late 1870s. In countries across Europe, Africa, and Asia, Grant was recognized as a figure who had helped preserve the United States and who represented the strength of democratic ideals. His diplomatic efforts and his ability to represent the United States on the global stage further cemented his place as a leader of both national and international significance. In the years following his death, Grant's influence on leadership and national unity continued to be felt. His example as a leader who valued perseverance, duty, and a commitment to justice became a model for future generations of American leaders. The qualities that defined his leadership, his determination, focus, and ability to navigate complex political and military challenges, were recognized as central to the success of the United States during one of its most trying periods. Grant's legacy as a leader also shaped the broader conversation about national identity and unity. In the years after his death, as the country faced new challenges and periods of division, Grant's example continued to serve as a touchstone for those seeking to unite the country and move forward. His leadership during the Civil War and Reconstruction provided a model of how a nation could overcome its greatest internal conflict and begin the process of healing and rebuilding. Today, Grant's influence is still seen in the way American leadership is defined. His ability to stay true to his principles despite the enormous challenges he faced remains a point of admiration. His leadership qualities, his courage, humility, and unwavering sense of duty continue to resonate in discussions of leadership in both the military and political realms. Ulysses S. Grant's leadership set a precedent for future generations, not just in terms of military strategy or presidential actions, but in his commitment to the greater good of the nation. His ability to prioritize the long-term unity of the United States over personal ambition and his focus on upholding the ideals of freedom and justice serve as guiding principles for American leadership. His legacy, marked by both triumph and tragedy, continues to shape the way leaders are remembered and how leadership is understood in the context of the nation's ongoing journey toward unity and equality.